Hello, and welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Shadow Investor. Maxwell Reed surveyed Chicago's gleaming skyline from his modest office window. At 42, he possessed the weathered hands of someone who'd built something from nothing, though few knew the extent of his empire. To most, he was just another mid-level investment advisor at Pinnacle Financial, making a comfortable but unremarkable living. That's exactly how Maxwell wanted it. Mr. Reed, his assistant Fiona knocked lightly. Your wife called. She wants to know if you'll be joining her at the Townsend Charity Gala tonight. Maxwell suppressed a grimace. Tell her I'll be there. Also, Mr. Hargrove approved your investment portfolio. You were right about the TechStart evaluations. A thin smile crossed Maxwell's face. His colleagues constantly underestimated him, a pattern he'd leveraged his entire life. Born to a third-generation steelworker in Pittsburgh, Maxwell had watched his father labor 60-hour weeks only to lose everything in the mill closures. But where others saw bankruptcy, teenage Maxwell saw opportunity. He began buying distressed properties around the shuttered factories with money saved from 3 simultaneous jobs. By 22, he owned 12 rental properties. By 30, he'd expanded into silent restaurant investments across 4 states. Maxwell constructed his empire like a spider weaving an invisible web. Through shell companies, minority stakeholder positions, and strategic partnerships, where his name never appeared on public documentation. His wife, Vanessa, believed they lived comfortably on his financial advisor's salary, never questioning how they afforded their Lake Michigan vacation home. That evening, Maxwell returned to their North Shore residence. The 3-bedroom colonial looked modest compared to neighboring mansions, another calculated choice. There you are. Vanessa swooped into the foyer, already dressed in a designer gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 38, she remained strikingly beautiful, with cinnamon hair and cutting green eyes currently narrowed in irritation. We're supposed to be there in an hour. I'll be ready in 20 minutes, Maxwell replied, loosening his tie as he climbed the stairs. Their marriage had been passionate once. Vanessa Caldwell, daughter of a Michigan Avenue boutique owner, had fallen for Maxwell's quiet confidence and unassuming ambition 14 years ago. Back then, she'd admired his blue-collar roots and straightforward manner. But lately, he sensed her growing discontent, especially around her increasingly affluent social circle. As he showered, Maxwell recalled overheating her phone conversation last week. It's just embarrassing, Trish. Everyone else's husband is a partner or director of something. Maxwell's been at the same desk for 12 years. It hadn't truly bothered him. Maxwell knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. The clandestine nature of his investments was deliberate, a lesson learned watching his father lose everything to creditors. What people couldn't see, they couldn't take. At the gala, Maxwell stood quietly nursing a scotch while Vanessa flitted between social groups. He nodded politely when introduced, but otherwise remained on the periphery, observing, calculating, his mind already on tomorrow's acquisition of 3 undervalued waterfront properties. Maxwell Reed, right? A deep voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Dominic Russell, a neurosurgeon whose reputation preceded him. Maxwell had researched everyone in Vanessa's social orbit, as he did with any potential connection. Dr. Russell, enjoying the evening? Maxwell offered a firm handshake. Call me Dom. And frankly, these events are tedious but necessary evils. The doctor's candor was refreshing. Your wife mentioned you work in finance? Investment advisory. Nothing particularly exciting. Dominic studied him with unexpected interest. Funny, I've always found people who downplay their work are either terrible at it or exceptional. Maxwell allowed a genuine half-smile. Sometimes it's just work. I doubt that. My brother-in-law mentioned a Maxwell Reed just orchestrated the Highland Restaurant Group acquisition. Remarkable deal structure, apparently. Different Maxwell Reed, I assume. A brief silence hung between them as Maxwell considered his response. He'd kept his professional achievements separate from his personal life for so long that the boundaries rarely blurred. Financial sectors full of people with similar names. Maxwell deflected smoothly. Of course, Dominic nodded, unconvinced. Well, whoever that Maxwell Reed is, he's apparently something of a silent genius. Across the room, Maxwell spotted Vanessa laughing with a tall, athletic man he recognized as Blake Sullivan, recently divorced hedge fund manager and newest member of the country club board. Something in their body language, the leaning in, the lingering touch on his arm, triggered Maxwell's finely tuned situational awareness. "If you'll excuse me," Maxwell said to Dominic, already calculating probabilities and contingencies as he walked away. By evening's end, 3 facts had become clear. Vanessa was growing increasingly embarrassed by what she perceived as his career stagnation. Blake Sullivan had initiated a deliberate pursuit of his wife. And most critically, Maxwell had spotted weakness in Blake's investment strategy that suggested his hedge fund was overleveraged. Knowledge was power, and patience, Maxwell's defining characteristic, was how he wielded it. Chapter 2. The Facade Cracks. 3 months after the charity gala, Maxwell sat across from Leo Conway, his oldest friend and the only person who knew the full extent of his business holdings. The Shoreline development passed final approval, Leo reported, sliding documents across the conference table. Once construction begins, property values in the adjacent neighborhood will double. Your investment there will quadruple conservatively. Maxwell nodded. And the restaurant group? 11 locations, all profitable. The Chicago flagship is performing beyond projections. Rossetti's has become the reservation everyone wants but can't get. Leo paused. Which reminds me, didn't you mention Vanessa wanted to dine there? She's mentioned it several times. Apparently, her friends consider it a status symbol. Leo's expression grew concerned. Have you considered telling her? About any of it? Maxwell straightened a perfectly aligned pen on the table. Our arrangement works. Vanessa enjoys her lifestyle without the complications of knowing its true source. Does it work? You've seemed distracted lately. Maxwell hesitated, then reached for his phone, pulling up a text message. This came through accidentally 3 weeks ago. Vanessa meant to send it to someone else. Leo read the screen. He canceled again. Working late, supposedly. Meet me at our spot at 8? You think she's having an affair? I know she is. Maxwell's voice remained level, emotionless. Blake Sullivan, the hedge fund manager from her social circle. Jesus, Max. What are you going to do? Nothing yet. Maxwell retrieved his phone. I'm still gathering information. That's your response? Gathering information? We're talking about your wife cheating. Maxwell's expression hardened slightly. Emotional reactions create mistakes. I don't make mistakes. Later that evening, Maxwell entered their silent home well past midnight, having deliberately stayed late at the office. A wine glass sat abandoned on the kitchen counter, lipstick staining its rim. Vanessa's purse was on the entryway table. She was home, likely asleep. He moved silently through the house to his home office, unlocking the bottom drawer of his desk, where he kept a secondary phone. Activating it, he reviewed the tracking data from the discrete device he'd placed in Vanessa's car 2 weeks earlier. The GPS log showed her at Blake Sullivan's Lake Forest address for nearly 4 hours that evening. Maxwell felt no surge of betrayal or jealousy, only a cold, calculating certainty solidifying into purpose. He'd suspected for months, confirmed it 3 weeks ago, and now had established a pattern. Sufficient evidence to proceed. The following morning brought a rare occurrence. Breakfast with Vanessa, who normally departed early for her interior design consultations. You were home late, she remarked, not looking up from her phone. End of quarter reports. Maxwell replied, watching her closely. Blake Sullivan called yesterday. He's organizing a dinner party next weekend at Rossetti's. Private room. Very exclusive. She finally met his eyes. I told him we'd come. Blake Sullivan. Maxwell repeated neutrally. You've mentioned him before. He's on several boards with me now. His firm manages investments for half our friends. Vanessa's tone carried a subtle challenge. You should network with him. Maybe he could help your career. Maxwell took a measured sip of coffee. That's thoughtful of you. I'm serious, Maxwell. Don't you ever think about advancement? Partners at your firm make 3 times what you do. I'm comfortable with where I am. Vanessa set down her phone with uncharacteristic force. Well, I'm not. Do you know how it feels when everyone asks what my husband does, and all I can say is that you're the same mid-level advisor you were when we met? While their husbands are making partner, starting firms, buying vacation homes. We have a vacation home, Maxwell noted calmly. That tiny lakeside cottage? I'm talking about real homes, Maxwell. Places people want to visit. The cottage she dismissed had cost $1.2 million in cash, a fact she didn't know, as Maxwell had told her they'd mortgaged it. Blake offered to look at our portfolio. By the way, Vanessa continued. He thinks he could double our returns. Did he? Maxwell felt the first flicker of genuine amusement. That's very generous. See? This is why you're stuck. You won't accept help or take chances. She stood, collecting her barely touched breakfast. The dinner is Saturday. Wear your blue suit. It's the only one that looks remotely current. After she left, Maxwell remained at the table, considering her outburst. For 14 years, he'd maintained his facade, partly for security, partly from habit. Now, he questioned whether it had been worth it. His phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Conference call with Rossetti's management in 30 minutes. New chef causing issues. Maxwell texted back, joining shortly. Also, need reservations Saturday night. Main dining room, not private. For you and Vanessa? I'll handle it personally. Maxwell pocketed his phone, decision made. Saturday would mark the beginning of the end, not just of his marriage, but the careful separation he'd maintained between his public persona and his true power. It was time for the silent partner to make some noise. Chapter 3. The Restaurant Revelation. Saturday evening arrived with a crystalline clarity that only comes from absolute certainty. Maxwell adjusted his tie. Not from the blue suit Vanessa had suggested, but a custom-tailored charcoal brioni he kept for significant business meetings. Tonight qualified. You're not wearing the blue, Vanessa observed sharply as they prepared to leave. It needed alterations, Maxwell replied. He'd actually donated the suit that morning, along with half his wardrobe. He wouldn't be needing the carefully cultivated image of mediocrity anymore. They drove separately to Rossetti's, Vanessa claiming she might stay late with friends, Maxwell knowing she planned to rendezvous with Blake afterward. The arrangement suited him perfectly. Rossetti's occupied a restored historic building in Chicago's West Loop, its limestone facade illuminated by discreet lighting that highlighted its architectural details without ostentation. A red carpet extended from the entrance, where a line of hopeful diners without reservations waited for any possibility of a table. The maitre d' brightened immediately upon Maxwell's arrival. Mr. Reed, an unexpected pleasure to have you dining with us tonight. Maxwell noticed Vanessa's confused glance. Thank you, Anthony. Is everything prepared? Of course, sir. Though I understood you'd be joining the Sullivan party in the private dining room. Change of plans. We'll dine in the main room tonight. Anthony nodded knowingly. Your usual table is ready, sir. As they followed Anthony through the restaurant, Maxwell observed Vanessa's growing bewilderment. The staff's deferential treatment continued. The sommelier approached unbidden with Maxwell's preferred wine. The executive chef emerged briefly to greet him with familiar respect. What is happening? Vanessa whispered as they were seated at the best table in the house, overlooking both the dining room and the open kitchen. How do they know you? I come here occasionally for business lunches, Maxwell replied smoothly. Before she could question further, Blake Sullivan appeared at their table, his practiced smile faltering slightly at finding them in the main dining room. Vanessa, Maxwell, we're all set up in the Medici room. His hand rested possessively on Vanessa's shoulder. Everyone's waiting. Maxwell noted the casual touch, the territorial display. Actually, Blake will be dining here tonight. Feel free to join us. Blake's confidence wavered momentarily before reasserting itself. Come on, man. I arranged this weeks ago. Private room, special menu, the works. It's impossible to get. And yet, here we are. Maxwell gestured to their table. Look, Blake lowered his voice. I don't know what your issue is, but this is embarrassing. The executive chef himself is preparing our meal in the private room. No, he isn't, Maxwell replied calmly. Blake's expression hardened. I specifically arranged. The executive chef does not cater private parties, not even for board members. That would be his sous chef, who is excellent, but not Chef Moretti. Vanessa's embarrassment transformed to anger. Maxwell, stop being difficult. Let's join Blake's party. You're welcome to join them, Vanessa. I'm staying here. Blake straightened, smoothing his tailored jacket. Fine. Stay here, Maxwell. Vanessa, shall we? Everyone's asking for you. Maxwell watched his wife's decision play across her face. Momentary hesitation followed by resolution as she stood to leave with Blake. He'd anticipated this choice. Just one moment, Maxwell said quietly. Blake turned impatiently. What now? I'd like to introduce my wife to some friends first. That table by the window. Maxwell nodded toward a group of 4 distinguished-looking diners. The gentleman in the navy suit is Howard Kessler, managing partner at Vanguard Capital. Beside him is Patricia Westbrook, chief investment strategist for Northern Trust. Vanessa's expression shifted from irritation to confusion. Why would they want to meet me? Because they've heard so much about you from our mutual friend Dominic Russell. And because they're considering investing in your interior design firm's expansion. This was news to Vanessa and deliberately misleading. Maxwell had indeed discussed her work with these associates, but primarily to ensure she would have sustainable income after their divorce. My expansion? I don't have expansion plans, she faltered. Perhaps you should develop some, Maxwell suggested. They're expecting us. Just a quick introduction before you join Blake. Caught off guard, Vanessa followed Maxwell to the table of financial elites, where he was greeted with genuine warmth and respect. Maxwell twice in 1 week. The world must be ending, Howard Kessler joked, standing to shake his hand. Howard, Patricia, Ben, Marlene, my wife, Vanessa Reed. The introductions proceeded smoothly, with Maxwell seamlessly discussing investment strategies and market projections that left Vanessa staring at him in mounting disbelief. Maxwell advised us against that pharmaceutical merger last quarter, Patricia said to Vanessa. Save us $20 million when it collapsed. Your husband sees the round corners. We've been trying to get him to join our board for years, Howard added. But he's too busy building his own empire to help steer ours. Vanessa's composure began to crack. I think there's been some confusion. Maxwell is an investment advisor at Pinnacle Financial. The table fell momentarily silent before Ben chuckled. That's just his day job. Surely you know about Reed Holdings, the restaurant group, the tech investments. Maxwell watched realization dawn across Vanessa's face. We should let you return to your dinner, he said smoothly. Vanessa has another engagement tonight. As they walked away, Vanessa gripped his arm painfully. What the hell is going on, Maxwell? You should join Blake. He's waiting, and you wouldn't want to keep him and your friends waiting. Not until you explain what that was about. Maxwell gently removed her hand from his arm. Go to your dinner, Vanessa. We'll discuss this at home. Her eyes narrowed. Fine, but this isn't over. Maxwell watched her storm toward the private dining room, then returned to his table. He had ordered and finished his appetizer when the commotion began. First came the raised voices from the private dining room, followed by Blake emerging with Vanessa and 6 others. Their wealthy friends, including the Whitcombs, the Prestons, and the newly divorced Trish Hathaway. This is ridiculous, Blake was saying loudly to the apologetic maitre d'. We're in the middle of dinner. That's when Maxwell noticed Leo Conway standing beside the restaurant manager, both looking grim. Right on schedule. Vanessa spotted Maxwell and marched toward him. Did you do this? They're kicking us out. I did nothing, Maxwell replied truthfully. He had merely set events in motion, knowing Blake's overinflated ego would inevitably cause a scene when challenged. The restaurant manager approached their table, Blake and the others trailing behind. Mr. Reed, I apologize for the disturbance. We've had an unfortunate situation arise. What's happening, Paul? Maxwell asked calmly. Mr. Sullivan became inappropriate with one of our staff members. The manager's professional demeanor remained intact, but his eyes conveyed the severity. Blake's face flushed red. That waitress was flirting with me all night. She practically invited. That waitress is my niece and a college student, Paul cut in coldly. And the owner has asked that your party leave immediately. The owner? Blake scoffed. Get him out here. Do you know who I am? I'm on a board of. I know exactly who you are, Blake. Maxwell interrupted, standing slowly. Paul, it's fine. Mr. Sullivan was just leaving. The restaurant fell silent as connections were rapidly made. Blake stared at Maxwell, comprehension dawning. You're not the owner? Among other things. Maxwell straightened his cuffs. Rossetti was my grandmother's maiden name. Vanessa's expression transformed from anger to shock. You own this restaurant? This one and 10 others. Maxwell nodded to Paul. Mr. Sullivan and his guests were just leaving. Their dinner is complimentary, of course. He can barely afford dinner. Vanessa blurted out, the weeks of dismissive comments culminating in this final, public humiliation. She turned to her friends with a desperate, nervous laugh. He makes $80,000 a year. He's been passed over for promotion 3 times. The silence that followed was deafening. Maxwell simply waited, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably. I excused myself, he finally said quietly. Minutes later, the restaurant manager approached their table. The owner has asked you to leave, he said politely, gesturing towards me. Her jaw hit the floor. Maxwell smiled thinly at the assembled group. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a dinner to finish and a divorce to initiate. As security arrived to escort the stunned party out, Maxwell noted with satisfaction the calculating looks on the faces of Vanessa's friends. By morning, everyone in their social circle would know of his wealth and her betrayal. Phase 1 of his plan was complete. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. The day after the restaurant incident, Maxwell moved methodically through his home, collecting essential documents and sentimental items. His father's pocket watch, his grandfather's worn Bible, photos from his childhood. He worked silently, efficiently, a man accustomed to executing well-laid plans. Vanessa had not returned home last night. Her phone calls and messages, first angry, then bewildered, finally pleading, remained unanswered as Maxwell prepared for the next phase. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. Maxwell opened it to find Leo and Naomi Parker, his longtime attorney. Everything ready? Naomi asked, her expression professional but concerned. Maxwell nodded, leading them to his home office. The movers arrive at noon for my personal items. I've marked everything. Vanessa called me 6 times last night, Leo said. Should I have warned you about her indiscretion sooner? You confirmed what I already suspected. The timing was perfect. Maxwell unlocked his safe, removing several hard drives and document portfolios. These need to go to the secure room at the Highland office. Max, Naomi began carefully. I've prepared the divorce filing as requested, but are you certain about these terms? You're offering her significantly more than required. I want this clean and quick. The house, the vacation property, $2 million in cash, and a monthly stipend for 5 years. Enough for her to maintain appearances while she builds her business. She cheated on you, Leo pointed out. Humiliated you publicly. Maxwell placed the documents in his briefcase. This isn't about emotion. It's about efficiency. The settlement eliminates her incentive to fight, to dig deeper into my holdings. And Blake Sullivan? Leo pressed. What about him? A cold smile touched Maxwell's lips. Blake's demise requires no intervention from me. His hedge fund is already faltering, leveraged beyond sustainability. I've simply accelerated certain market forces. The Wellington Group acquisition, Naomi realized. You're forcing the disclosure of his fund's position. Among other things, Blake built his reputation on insider connections and market manipulation. I'm ensuring the SEC receives comprehensive documentation of his activities. Leo shook his head in amazement. You've been planning this for months. Since the charity gala, Maxwell confirmed, when I first noticed his interest in Vanessa, though the specific strategy evolved as I gathered information. A text alert sounded on Maxwell's phone. He checked it, then stood. Vanessa just turned onto our street. Naomi, wait for us in the study. Leo with me. They positioned themselves in the living room moments before Vanessa burst through the front door, still wearing last night's evening dress, her makeup smudged from crying. "How dare you ignore my calls?" she began, then stopped short upon seeing Leo. "What's he doing here?" "Supporting a friend," Leo replied coldly. Vanessa's eyes darted between them. "Maxwell, we need to talk privately." "Leo stays," Maxwell stated flatly. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of him." "Fine." She dropped her clutch purse on the console table. "You've been lying to me for our entire marriage." "Interesting perspective," Maxwell replied. "I never lied about my income or assets. You assumed, and I allowed the assumption." "Allowed? You deliberately misled me. All these years, letting me believe we were just getting by when you own, what? Restaurants? Real estate? What else haven't you told me?" "That's no longer your concern." Maxwell remained impassive. "Naomi Parker is waiting in the study with divorce papers. I'm prepared to be generous, Vanessa. The house, the lake property, financial support while you establish your business independently." Her expression shifted instantly from accusation to calculation. "Divorce? Maxwell, don't be absurd. Whatever you think happened with Blake." "I know exactly what happened with Blake." Maxwell cut her off. "The affair began 4 months ago, shortly after the charity gala. You meet primarily at his Lake Forest house on Tuesdays and Thursdays, though there have been 3 hotel encounters as well." Vanessa's face drained of color. "You had me follow? Unnecessary. Your location tracking was enabled on our shared cloud account." A bitter laugh escaped her. "So what now? You punish me by revealing you're actually rich? That's your revenge." "This isn't revenge, Vanessa. It's dissolution. Our marriage has been deteriorating for years. The affair simply accelerated the timeline. You can't just throw away 14 years. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start." Her voice softened strategically. "Now that I know who you really are, things will be different." Maxwell studied her, noting the familiar manipulation techniques. "That's precisely the problem. You never knew who I was because you never bothered to look beyond the surface. You saw what you expected to see until it no longer satisfied you." Vanessa's facade cracked. "You were never there. Always working, always distant. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to trust your husband," Leo interjected. "Talk to him before jumping into bed with someone else. Stay out of this." Vanessa snapped, turning back to Maxwell. "If you're so wealthy, why hide it? Why live like this when we could have had so much more?" "Because I value security over display," Maxwell answered simply. "My father lost everything pursuing the appearance of success. I built something lasting by focusing on substance. Well, your substance made me a laughingstock." Tears welled in her eyes. "Everyone thought I married a nobody. And that bothered you enough to betray our vows." Maxwell's voice remained even. "Which tells me everything I need to know about your character." The finality in his tone penetrated her defenses. Vanessa stared at him, truly seeing the steel beneath his quiet exterior for perhaps the first time. "The divorce papers," Maxwell continued, "include a confidentiality agreement. You'll tell no one about my business holdings beyond what became public last night. In exchange, your infidelity remains private. And if I refuse, then you'll receive only what Illinois law mandates for an at-fault divorce. Likely nothing, given the evidence I've compiled and the prenuptial agreement you signed." Vanessa's expression hardened. "So I get hush money and a house while you continue your secret empire? That's your idea of fair?" "Fair would be leaving you with nothing," Leo muttered. Maxwell silenced him with a glance. "This isn't negotiable, Vanessa. Sign today, and you maintain your lifestyle and dignity. Fight me, and you lose both." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly as Vanessa weighed her options. Finally, her shoulders slumped in resignation. "Fine. Where do I sign? Naomi will walk you through everything. Then I suggest you call Blake. He's going to need emotional support in the coming weeks." "Why? What have you done?" Maxwell checked his watch. "Nothing yet. But by market close today, the SEC will be reviewing some very interesting documentation regarding his fund's activities." "You're destroying him because of me?" Horror dawned on her face. "No, Vanessa. Blake Sullivan is destroying himself through his own arrogance and fraud. I'm simply declining to protect him from the consequences of his actions." Maxwell nodded toward the study. Naomi is waiting. As Vanessa walked numbly toward the study, Leo whistled low. "Cold, Max, effective but cold." "This is just the beginning," Maxwell replied, checking his phone as another alert came through. Blake's attempting to liquidate positions ahead of the Wellington announcement. "Exactly as predicted." "You've thought of everything," Leo observed. "No," Maxwell corrected him. "I've simply recognized patterns and prepared accordingly." People like Blake and Vanessa are predictable in their self-interest. They seek shortcuts to status and wealth, which inevitably creates vulnerabilities. "And you've never wanted status?" Maxwell considered the question. "Status is useful when strategically deployed. But no, I've never craved recognition for its own sake." He glanced toward the study where Vanessa was signing away their marriage. "That's why she never truly knew me. She couldn't comprehend someone valuing power without its display." 3 hours later, Maxwell stood in the empty master bedroom. The movers had taken his carefully labeled possessions, leaving Vanessa's untouched. The divorce papers were signed, notarized, and filed electronically. His methodical dismantling of their shared life was nearly complete. His phone rang. Howard Kessler from Vanguard Capital. "Maxwell, just heard about Sullivan's fund imploding. SEC's got auditors crawling through his books as we speak. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that anonymous tip with all that documentation, would you?" "Market forces demand transparency, Howard." A knowing chuckle came through the line. "Of course. Listen, word's spreading about your restaurant group and other holdings. The board position we discussed is officially yours if you want it." "I appreciate that. Let's discuss next week." Maxwell ended the call, gazing around the bedroom one final time. The demolition phase was proceeding perfectly. Now it was time to rebuild, on his terms, in plain sight. Chapter 5. The House of Cards. The Wellington Group announcement hit financial news outlets at precisely 9:30 a.m. on Monday, sending shockwaves through specific sectors of the market. Maxwell watched from his new penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan as Bloomberg reported the development with urgency. In a stunning move, Wellington Group has announced its acquisition of Meridian Technologies, revealing significant undisclosed liabilities that have sent Meridian's stock plummeting 72% in pre-market trading. Several hedge funds with major positions in Meridian are facing catastrophic losses, most notably Sullivan Capital Management. Maxwell sipped his coffee, satisfaction warming him more than the beverage. Blake Sullivan had built his fund on 3 pillars: insider connections, media manipulation, and concentrated positions in technology stocks, particularly Meridian, where Blake's college roommate served as CFO. What Blake hadn't known was that Maxwell owned 8% of Wellington Group through various shell companies, giving him advanced knowledge of the acquisition plans and the troubling findings during due diligence. Maxwell hadn't acted on this information directly. That would be illegal insider trading. Instead, he had simply ensured Wellington's board understood the importance of complete transparency regarding Meridian's financial irregularities upon announcement. His phone rang, Leo calling from the Highland office. "You seeing this? Sullivan's fund is finished. They're halting redemptions while the SEC investigation proceeds." "Expected outcome," Maxwell replied calmly. "How's the restaurant group transition?" "Smooth so far. The management team is relieved you're taking a more public role. Reservation requests have doubled since word spread about your ownership. Increase staffing accordingly. I want quality maintained." Maxwell moved to his laptop, reviewing preliminary designs for Reed Tower, his newly announced downtown development project. "Any word for Vanessa?" Her attorney requested clarification on the confidentiality provisions this morning. "Apparently, she's already struggling with keeping quiet about your assets. She'll comply. The alternative is financial suicide." Maxwell zoomed in on an architectural detail, making a note for the project manager. "And Blake?" Leo's tone darkened. "Made bail this morning. The securities fraud charges are just the beginning. They're finding irregularities going back years. Word is he's trying to reach you." I'm not available to him. He showed up at the Highland office. Security turned him away, but he seemed desperate. Maxwell considered this development. Increase security at all properties. If he approaches me directly, I'll handle it. After ending the call, Maxwell reviewed his calendar. The day included meetings with his expanded executive team, an interview with the Chicago Business Journal, and dinner with Dominic Russell and his wife. The first social engagement since his public emergence. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. You've destroyed everything. At least give me that. Blake. Maxwell deleted the message without responding. Blake Sullivan was no longer relevant to his plans. Later that afternoon, Maxwell sat across from Catherine Zhang, the Chicago Business Journal's most respected financial reporter. She'd been pursuing an interview for weeks, ever since his ownership of Rossetti's became public knowledge. Mr. Reed, your emergence as a major player in Chicago business has taken everyone by surprise, she began. Some are calling you the ghost because of how invisibly you built your empire. Was that deliberate? I prefer strategic privacy, Maxwell replied. Building quietly allowed me to focus on fundamentals rather than perception. Yet your companies have outperformed market averages by significant margins. The Reed portfolio's restaurants show 40% higher profitability than industry standards. Your real estate developments have revitalized struggling neighborhoods without displacing residents. There seems to be a philosophy beyond just wealth accumulation. Maxwell appreciated her preparation. My father lost our family home during the steel industry collapse. I watched financial institutions profit from that devastation while communities suffered. My approach attempts to align financial success with community stability. Yet you've remained personally unknown until recently. What changed? A calculated pause. Let's just say certain personal developments necessitated a more public profile. Catherine's eyes sharpened with interest. You're referring to your divorce? That's a private matter. Of course. She shifted tactics. Your ex-wife's interior design firm has just announced a partnership with Whitcomb Developments, owned by close friends of Blake Sullivan, who's currently facing securities fraud charges. Any connection? Maxwell maintained his neutral expression. None whatsoever. My ex-wife's business activities are her own concern. Catherine clearly didn't believe him, but moved on. Let's discuss Reed Tower. At 68 stories, it will be your most ambitious project yet. The interview continued professionally, with Maxwell revealing selective details about his business philosophy and future plans. When it concluded, Catherine lingered during the photographer's setup for accompanying portraits. Off the record, Mr. Reed, there are rumors that Blake Sullivan's downfall wasn't entirely coincidental to your divorce. Maxwell met her gaze steadily. The market rewards integrity and punishes its absence, Ms. Zhang. That's not coincidence, it's causality. And your ex-wife's involvement with Sullivan is irrelevant to his legal troubles. His fraud predates any personal connections. Catherine studied him with newfound respect. You're either the most calculating man I've ever met or the most principled. I haven't decided which. Perhaps principles require calculation to survive in today's world, Maxwell suggested as the photographer called him to position. That evening, Maxwell welcomed Dominic Russell and his wife Elaine to his penthouse for dinner. The neurosurgeon had been the first to recognize Maxwell's deliberate obscurity at the charity gala months ago, and Maxwell had identified him as a potential ally in his reconstructed social circle. Spectacular view, Dominic commented, accepting a glass of whiskey as they stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Though I must say, I preferred the mystery of not knowing whether you were the Maxwell Reed behind the Highland acquisition. Maxwell allowed a rare, genuine smile. The mystery served its purpose, which was freedom to operate without expectations or interference. Elaine joined them, champagne in hand. Dom tells me you're reshaping your public image completely. New development, philanthropy announcements, board positions. Quite the transformation. Evolution rather than transformation, Maxwell corrected. The foundations were always there, just not visible. Speaking of visible, Dominic said carefully, I saw Vanessa at the Palmer House yesterday. With Blake Sullivan. Maxwell showed no reaction. Unsurprising. even with his legal troubles? Elaine asked incredulously. Birds of a feather, Dominic muttered. Blake's legal situation will resolve as justice dictates. Maxwell said neutrally. My interest in both him and Vanessa ended with a divorce. The elegant dinner proceeded pleasantly, focusing on mutual interests in urban development and healthcare innovation. As they were saying goodbye, Dominic took Maxwell aside. Fair warning. Vanessa's been telling people you're vindicatively destroying Blake to punish her. Says you're obsessed and dangerous. Predictable narrative, Maxwell replied, unconcerned. The facts will speak for themselves. After his guest departed, Maxwell received an alert from his building security. Blake Sullivan was in the lobby, intoxicated and demanding to see him. Shall we remove him, Mr. Reed? The security chief asked over the intercom. Maxwell considered his options. Confronting Blake now might actually accelerate his plans. Send him up, but have security remain in the hallway. Minutes later, a disheveled Blake Sullivan stood swaying slightly in Maxwell's penthouse entryway. His designer suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Nice place, Blake slurred, looking around bitterly. All this while pretending to be nobody. You must have enjoyed watching us all underestimate you. State your purpose, Blake. It's late. My purpose? Blake laughed harshly. My purpose is gone. Funds frozen, clients fleeing, SEC freezing my assets. All because you couldn't handle your wife wanting a real man. Maxwell regarded him with cold assessment. Your fund collapsed because you committed securities fraud, Blake. Your relationship with my ex-wife is irrelevant to those facts. Bullshit. The timing's too perfect. You orchestrated everything. The Wellington deal, the SEC investigation, all of it. You give me too much credit. Blake's desperation turned to rage. You arrogant bastard. You think you've won? Vanessa never loved you. She told me everything. How you were emotionally absent, sexually inadequate. She was using you for years. Maxwell's expression remained unchanged. Are you finished? No. You destroyed my life over a woman who was throwing herself at me. She's still with me, you know. We're planning to leave the country once I handle these trumped-up charges. Planning to flee prosecution is a federal offense, Blake. You might want to reconsider announcing that intention. Blake lunged forward suddenly, grabbing Maxwell's shirt. You think this is a game? I've lost everything. With surprising speed, Maxwell twisted, using Blake's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, Blake found himself face down on the marble floor, Maxwell's knee pressing precisely between his shoulder blades. Listen carefully, Maxwell said quietly, increasing pressure as Blake struggled. You lost everything through your own greed and fraud. I simply declined to protect you from the consequences. He leaned closer. And Blake? If you ever approach me again, what's happening to you now will seem like a minor inconvenience compared to what follows. Maxwell released him and stepped back. Security will escort you out. I suggest you focus on your legal defense rather than your relationship with Vanessa. She has a pattern of abandoning sinking ships. As security led the humiliated Blake away, Maxwell straightened his shirt cuffs, noting with satisfaction that the confrontation had unfolded almost exactly as he'd anticipated. Blake's desperation, Vanessa's betrayal, their plans to flee, all information he could use. The house of cards was collapsing precisely as designed. But Maxwell wasn't finished yet. The final phase of his plan required one more calculated move, time for maximum effect. Chapter 6, The Invisible Hand. 3 weeks after his confrontation with Blake, Maxwell sat in Naomi Parker's office reviewing documents for his newest acquisition, a struggling media company that owns several influential local publications, including the Society magazine that had been Vanessa's Bible for years. The bankruptcy court approved our bid, Naomi confirmed. Ownership transfers next Tuesday. We've kept your involvement completely confidential, as requested. Excellent. And the editorial transition. The new editor-in-chief starts immediately. Catherine Zhang from the Business Journal. She's eager to implement the editorial vision you discussed, particularly the feature on financial fraud among Chicago's elite. Maxwell nodded with satisfaction. Perfect timing. Speaking of timing, Naomi hesitated. The FBI has requested an interview with you regarding Blake Sullivan's case. Apparently, he's been making accusations. Expected. Schedule it at their convenience. I have nothing to hide. That's just it. Max Blake's claiming you engineered his downfall, using insider information about the Wellington Meridian deal. A desperate defense strategy. The SEC has already reviewed my trading records and found nothing irregular. Maxwell adjusted his tie. Blake is attempting to create a persecution narrative to distract from his own malfeasance. Naomi studied him. You really did think of everything, didn't you? No direct trades, no paper trail connecting you to Wellington's decision timing. I simply ensured that truth had a clear path to discovery. What Blake calls persecution, the law calls transparency. As Maxwell left the law office, his phone buzzed with a text from Leo. V spotted at Chicago First National. Banking records show large withdrawal attempt. Bank froze accounts per divorce agreement. Maxwell frowned slightly. Vanessa attempting to access extraordinary funds suggested she and Blake might be accelerating whatever escape plan they concocted. A complication, but not an insurmountable one. He texted back, monitor closely. Alert me to any travel arrangements. That afternoon, Maxwell met with the FBI agents as arranged. The interview took place in a conference room at the Highland office building, with Naomi present as his counsel. Mr. Reed, Agent Diaz began, we're investigating allegations made by Blake Sullivan regarding your possible involvement in the market events surrounding Meridian Technologies. I'm happy to assist, Maxwell replied calmly. Mr. Sullivan claims you orchestrated the Wellington acquisition timing to deliberately destroy his fund, using insider information. Mr. Sullivan is facing criminal charges and seeking scapegoats, Maxwell observed. What specific questions do you have for me? For the next hour, Maxwell answered their questions with precise, factual responses. Yes, he owned shares in Wellington Group through various investment vehicles. No, he had no direct role in acquisition timing decisions. Yes, he was aware his ex-wife had developed a relationship with Sullivan during their marriage. No, that had no bearing on his business activities. One final question, Mr. Reed, Agent Prescott said. Did you at any point provide information to the SEC regarding Sullivan Capital Management's trading activities? I believe in market transparency, Agent Prescott. When I became aware of potentially irregular trading patterns through publicly available information, I compiled that analysis and submitted it through proper channels. As any concerned market participant should. The agents exchanged glances. That's not in Sullivan's allegations. Because he's unaware of it, Maxwell replied. The SEC keeps whistleblower identities confidential. After the agents departed, Naomi shook her head in amazement. You just admitted to triggering the investigation that destroyed him. I admitted to fulfilling my civic duty by reporting suspected securities violations through proper channels. Nothing more. You're either the most ethical, ruthless man I've ever met, or the most ruthlessly ethical. Maxwell smiled thinly. Is there a difference? Later that evening, Maxwell received an unexpected visitor at his penthouse, Dominic Russell, arriving without his wife and looking troubled. Sorry for the unannounced visit, Dominic said as Maxwell welcomed him in. Something's happened that you should know about. Please sit. Maxwell poured 2 whiskeys, handing one to his friend. Elaine hosted a charity committee meeting today. Vanessa attended. Dominic took a substantial sip before continuing. She was unhinged, Maxwell, telling everyone you're manipulating the legal system to persecute Blake, that you've frozen her assets illegally, that you're threatening them. All false, of course. Obviously. But she's convincing to those who don't know better. She had several of the women in tears with stories about your supposed controlling behavior during your marriage. Maxwell considered this information. And how did Elaine respond? Called her out completely. Reminded everyone that Blake's facing federal charges based on documented fraud, not your influence. Then suggested Vanessa might want to reconsider her loyalty to a man who victimized his own investors. I appreciate Elaine's support. Dominic leaned forward. There's more. After most guests left, Vanessa received a phone call that upset her severely. She mentioned something about offshore accounts being frozen and Blake being denied bail modification. Then she asked Elaine if she could recommend a criminal defense attorney. This was significant news. Blake must have attempted to access emergency funds only to discover Maxwell had already identified and reported his hidden accounts to federal authorities. "Thank you for telling me this," Maxwell said. "It may be relevant to an ongoing federal investigation." "You knew, didn't you? About their offshore accounts?" Maxwell sipped his whiskey. "Let's just say I've learned to anticipate certain behaviors from people with particular character profiles. They're planning to run, aren't they?" "We're planning," Maxwell corrected. "Those options are now closed." Dominic studied him with newfound respect and wariness. "You're a dangerous man to cross," Maxwell read. "I prefer thorough." After Dominic left, Maxwell made a call to Agent Diaz, sharing the information about Vanessa's comments regarding offshore accounts. The agent thanked him, noting they'd be following up immediately. The next morning brought news that Blake Sullivan had been arrested again, this time for attempting to access hidden assets in violation of court orders. His bail was revoked. Vanessa was brought in for questioning regarding her knowledge of these accounts. Maxwell watched the developments with clinical detachment. His invisible hand had guided events, but Blake and Vanessa had made their own choices at every turn. He had merely ensured those choices had consequences. Later that day, the first edition of Chicago Society under its new ownership hit newsstands. The cover story, "Financial Predators: How Fraud Artists Target Chicago's Elite," featured Blake Sullivan prominently, with extensive details of his scheme and victims. An accompanying sidebar noted Vanessa Reed's interior design firm had received substantial payments from Sullivan's fund for consulting services that appear to have no legitimate business purpose. Maxwell's phone rang incessantly as former social connections sought his comment on the explosive article. He declined all calls except one. Catherine Zhang, the new editor-in-chief. "Quite an impactful first issue," he noted when he answered. "The facts spoke for themselves," she replied. "Though I'm curious, did you know what we'd find when you suggested investigating Sullivan's client relationships?" "I had suspicions. Your team did the actual journalism, including discovering your ex-wife received over $300,000 for design services that no one can verify. An unfortunate coincidence," Maxwell said neutrally. Catherine's skeptical silence spoke volumes. Finally, she said, "The FBI interviewed her this morning about those payments. Sources tell me she implicated Sullivan completely, claiming she was manipulated." "Unsurprising. You know," Catherine observed, "for someone whose ex-wife is potentially facing criminal charges, you seem remarkably unaffected." "My concern is for justice, not vengeance, Ms. Zhang." "Of course." Her tone suggested complete disbelief. "One more thing. We're planning a profile on you for next month's issue. The invisible hand behind Chicago's Renaissance. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" "I'll consider it," Maxwell replied, ending the call. By nightfall, Maxwell had received confirmation that Vanessa had been released after her FBI interview, but with travel restrictions pending further investigation. Blake remained in custody, his legal problems mounting as investigators discovered additional irregularities in his fund's operations. Standing at his penthouse window overlooking the city, Maxwell allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 2 of his plan, the complete dismantling of Blake's business and reputation, had been accomplished without Maxwell ever directly attacking him. The man had been destroyed by his own actions, with Maxwell merely ensuring those actions received proper scrutiny. Phase 3 was about to begin. The reconstruction of Maxwell's public identity, fully in control of his own narrative for the first time. The restaurant incident had been merely the opening move in a much larger game, one where Maxwell had rewritten the rules entirely. His phone rang again. "Leo." "It's done," his friend reported. "Blake Sullivan has agreed to a plea deal. 5 to 7 years, full cooperation against other conspirators." "And Vanessa?" "Being investigated for potential money laundering through her design firm. Her assets have been frozen pending the outcome." Maxwell nodded to himself. Perfect timing for the Reed Foundation announcement tomorrow. The contrast won't be lost on anyone, Leo agreed. While they face disgrace and criminal charges, you'll be launching a $50 million initiative to revitalize struggling neighborhoods. The same ones where Sullivan's fund redline borrowers. Poetic justice, Maxwell murmured. More like calculated justice, Leo corrected. You've choreographed every move since the night at Rossetti's. The question is, are you satisfied now? Maxwell considered the question seriously. Not satisfaction, Leo. Completion. I've simply restored proper balance. And what does that mean for Vanessa? Maxwell's expression hardened slightly. She made her choices. Now she'll live with the consequences. You know, she'll lose everything. Her reputation, her business, possibly her freedom. Yes, Maxwell acknowledged coldly. Just as she was willing to let me lose everything that mattered to me. My dignity, my privacy, my carefully constructed life. The ruthlessness in his voice surprised even Leo. I'm starting to think Blake Sullivan got off easy compared to what you had planned for Vanessa. Maxwell turned from the window. The invisible hand doesn't punish Leo. It simply ensures that actions find their natural consequences. Blake committed financial crimes and will face justice for them. Vanessa committed betrayal and will discover that her carefully cultivated social standing was built on sand. As he ended the call, Maxwell reviewed the next day's schedule, the foundation announcement, meetings with community leaders, and a private dinner with potential business partners. His new life was taking shape exactly as planned. The restaurant revelation had been just the beginning. His true revenge would be living well, publicly and powerfully, while those who had dismissed him faced the consequences of their own character flaws. Not through his direct action, but through his meticulous arrangement of circumstances where truth inevitably emerged. That was the art of the invisible hand, guiding events while leaving no fingerprints. Chapter 7. The Phoenix Strategy. 6 months after the restaurant revelation, Maxwell Reed had transformed from Chicago's hidden power broker to its most visible business leader. Reed Tower was rising rapidly downtown. The Reed Foundation's community initiatives were earning national attention, and his expanded restaurant group had become the city's culinary gold standard. Today marked another milestone, the grand opening of Reed Innovation Center, a technology incubator focused on supporting entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Maxwell stood at the podium, addressing the gathered crowd of business leaders, community representatives, and media. Success should create opportunities, not just accumulate wealth, he concluded his remarks. This center will ensure that innovation isn't limited by zip code or background, but fueled by determination and vision. The applause was genuinely enthusiastic. Maxwell had carefully cultivated his public image as a business leader with conscience, the antithesis of predatory figures like Blake Sullivan, whose sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. As Maxwell mingled with guests afterward, Catherine Zhang approached with recorder in hand. Impressive facility, she noted, especially the decision to name the main fellowship after your father. He believed in building lasting value. Maxwell replied, this honors his philosophy. Speaking of lasting value, Catherine segued smoothly. I'm following up on the Sullivan case. Sources tell me he's providing evidence against several other fund managers in exchange for sentencing considerations. Justice takes many forms. Indeed. And what about your ex-wife? Any comment on her plea agreement? Vanessa had ultimately accepted a deal, probation, and significant financial penalties in exchange for testimony against Blake and other conspirators. Her design business had collapsed, her social standing evaporated, and her assets seized to satisfy restitution requirements. My ex-wife's legal situation is her own concern, Maxwell replied neutrally. I wish her well in rebuilding her life. Catherine clearly didn't believe his diplomatic response, but moved to another topic. The rumor mill says you've purchased the Adler Building, the same property where your father once worked before the steel collapse. Sentiment or strategy? Maxwell allowed a small smile. Both. That building represents where I came from and where I'm going. We'll be announcing its redevelopment next month, maintaining the historic facade while creating sustainable internal spaces. After Catherine departed, Maxwell checked his watch. He had one more important meeting today, one not on his official calendar. 90 minutes later, Maxwell sat in a private room at Gibson Steakhouse across from Howard Kessler and Patricia Westbrook from Vanguard Capital. The Sullivan Capital Assets acquisition is proceeding smoothly, Howard reported. Once the court approves our bid, we'll control their entire portfolio at approximately 30 cents on the dollar. With your capital contribution, we'll be positioned to stabilize those investments and eventually restore significant value, Patricia added. The former clients who stayed with the receiver will be made whole. Maxwell nodded approvingly. And the management structure we discussed? In place, Howard confirmed. The new entity will operate independently, but with oversight from the Reed Group. Your role remains officially advisory, maintaining appropriate distance given the circumstances. Perfect. This arrangement represented the culmination of Maxwell's Phoenix strategy, rising from the ashes of Blake Sullivan's collapsed fund to rescue its legitimate assets while maintaining ethical separation. The former clients would recover their investments. Maxwell would add significantly to his holdings, and his reputation for financial rescue rather than predation would be reinforced. There's one other matter, Patricia said carefully. Vanessa Reed has applied for a position with our HR department. Obviously, given your relationship with Vanguard, we wanted to consult you before responding. Maxwell considered this unexpected development. Her qualifications? Surprisingly relevant. Before her interior design business, she worked in corporate recruitment. Her references, excluding recent history, are strong. And she specifically applied to Vanguard. Knowing my connection? Howard nodded. That's what raised flags. It could be innocent. We're one of the few major firms without direct Sullivan exposure. Or it could be an attempt to access information about me. Maxwell completed the thought. Or perhaps simply a desperate move from someone whose options have narrowed considerably. How would you like us to proceed? Patricia asked. Maxwell thought carefully before responding. Review her application according to normal protocols. If she's qualified, interview her, but place her in a department with no access to information regarding my investments or activities. Howard raised an eyebrow. Surprisingly merciful, given the circumstances. Not mercy, Maxwell corrected. Pragmatism. Denying her employment because of our past would suggest I'm still affected by it. I'm not. This wasn't entirely true. Maxwell's systematic dismantling of Vanessa's life through legal, financial, and social mechanisms had been executed with cold precision. He had ensured she lost everything that mattered to her: status, wealth, reputation. Her current desperate circumstances were the direct result of his invisible orchestration. Yet true victory required indifference, not continued engagement. Maxwell's Phoenix strategy wasn't just about rebuilding his public empire, but about emerging from the ashes of his marriage transformed, stronger, more visible, and completely detached from the past. After dinner, Maxwell returned to Reed Tower, where his penthouse now occupied the top 3 floors of the completed portion. The space was dramatically different from his former home with Vanessa. Clean architectural lines, museum-quality art, and technological innovation throughout. It reflected his true aesthetic, no longer constrained by the facade of middle-class modesty. Leo was waiting in the private elevator lobby. Sorry to ambush you, but this couldn't wait. He handed Maxwell a folder. Vanessa reached out to Naomi today, requesting a meeting with you. Maxwell scanned the enclosed letter. Vanessa's carefully worded request cited closure and personal healing as reasons for the meeting. Interesting timing, Maxwell observed. The same day she applies to Vanguard. You think they're connected? Undoubtedly. The question is how. Maxwell entered his penthouse, Leo following. Her assets remain frozen, pending final restitution determinations. Her probability of securing comparable employment elsewhere is minimal given the publicity surrounding the case. She's seeking leverage. So you'll refuse the meeting? Maxwell poured 2 bourbons, handing one to Leo. On the contrary, I'll agree to it. Leo looked surprised. After everything she did, why give her the satisfaction? Because refusing suggests fear or lingering emotion. Neither applies. Maxwell sipped his bourbon. Additionally, I'm curious what strategy she's attempting. It could be genuine remorse. Leo suggested without conviction. Possible, but implausible. Vanessa's patterns suggest calculated self-interest rather than authentic accountability. 2 days later, Maxwell sat in a private room at the Peninsula Hotel, waiting. He'd chosen neutral territory for this meeting. Neither his space nor hers, but ground that conveyed his position of power while maintaining public visibility. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, and Maxwell had to admit she'd managed her appearance carefully despite reduced circumstances. Her clothing was understated, but quality, her makeup minimal, her demeanor subdued rather than entitled. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after declining his offer of refreshment. "I wasn't sure you would. I was curious about your purpose," Maxwell replied neutrally. Vanessa took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize. My behavior during our marriage, especially toward the end, was inexcusable. The affair with Blake, the public humiliation at the restaurant. I've had a lot of time to reflect on my choices." Maxwell observed her performance with detached analysis. The contrition seemed well-rehearsed, though not necessarily insincere. "I appreciate your apology," he said simply. She looked momentarily thrown by his calm acceptance. "I expected more resistance. What would be the point? Our marriage is over. The legal consequences of subsequent events have been determined by appropriate authorities. There's nothing to debate. That's it." After 14 years together, Maxwell studied her. "What were you hoping for, Vanessa? Anger? Recriminations? Some demonstration that you still affect me emotionally?" Color rose in her cheeks. "I was hoping for a conversation between two people who shared a significant portion of their lives, not a corporate negotiation. Then perhaps you should have requested that conversation before pursuing a relationship with Blake Sullivan, not after its consequences have become untenable." The directness visibly unsettled her. "That's fair," she conceded. "But people make mistakes, Maxwell. Terrible ones. I've lost everything. My business, my home, my reputation. Actions have consequences," Maxwell observed dispassionately. "Your actions engineered those consequences." Vanessa's composed facade cracked. "Don't pretend you didn't orchestrate everything that happened to Blake and me. The SEC investigation, the media exposure, the asset seizures. It all started with you." Maxwell remained impassive. "Blake Sullivan committed securities fraud. You accepted funds without providing legitimate services. My actions merely ensured proper regulatory review. You could have just divorced me without destroying my entire life. I offered you a generous settlement. You chose to align yourself with a criminal instead." Vanessa struggled to regain composure. "Fine. Yes, I made catastrophic choices. But does that justify reducing me to nothing? I can't even rent an apartment without a co-signer now. Which brings us to your actual purpose," Maxwell said calmly. "You didn't request this meeting for closure. You want financial assistance." The accuracy of his assessment visibly deflated her. "Is that so terrible? To ask for help from someone who once cared about me? Not terrible. Simply predictable." Maxwell leaned forward slightly. "You're also applying to Vanguard Capital, where I have significant influence. Both approaches suggest you're seeking to leverage our past relationship rather than truly rebuilding independently. That's not fair. I applied to Vanguard because they're one of the few places not tainted by Blake's scandal. My qualifications are legitimate. I haven't interfered with your application," Maxwell assured her. "If you're qualified, you'll be considered accordingly." Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. "You haven't blocked me?" "No, nor will I. Your professional future is your own to determine." This unexpected response seemed to disarm her more than any rejection. "I don't understand. After everything that happened, you'd allow me to work at a company where you have influence? Your employment at Vanguard would be based on your qualifications and compartmentalized from any connection to me." Maxwell checked his watch. "Now, was there anything else you wanted to discuss?" Vanessa stared at him, reassessing. "You really have completely detached, haven't you? I'm just a closed chapter to you. We divorced over a year ago, Vanessa. I've moved forward. I recommend you do the same. Without resources, That's nearly impossible. Maxwell considered her argument dispassionately. I'll have Naomi review options for unfreezing a portion of your remaining assets for living expenses, pending completion of your restitution payments. A structured arrangement with appropriate oversight. Hope flashed across her face. You do that. It's pragmatic. Your inability to sustain yourself extends the legal proceedings unnecessarily. As they stood to conclude the meeting, Vanessa made one final attempt at emotional connection. I did love you once, Maxwell, before I got caught up in status and appearances. Maxwell regarded her with clinical detachment. Perhaps, but love without loyalty or respect is ultimately meaningless. I wish you well, Vanessa, but our paths won't cross again after today. He left her standing in the private dining room, feeling neither satisfaction nor animosity, only the clean finality of a chapter properly concluded. Later that evening, Maxwell received confirmation that Blake Sullivan's sentencing recommendation had been filed. The prosecutor was seeking 8 years based on the severity of the fraud, partially offset by his cooperation against other conspirators. Maxwell forwarded this information to Catherine Zhang with a brief message, background only. No attribution. Her reply came quickly. Understood. Running feature next week on financial ethics reforms inspired by the Sullivan case. Care to comment as industry leader? He smiled slightly at the transparent attempt to connect him publicly to Sullivan's downfall. Happy to discuss reform proposals generally. Specific cases best addressed by regulatory authorities. The Phoenix strategy was working precisely as designed. From the ashes of his intentionally modest former life, Maxwell had emerged fully formed in his true capacity. Powerful, visible, yet still maintaining careful control over his narrative. His revenge against Vanessa and Blake hadn't required direct confrontation or obvious attacks. He had simply arranged circumstances where their own flawed characters led inevitably to their downfall, while he rose higher with each calculated move. The silent partner had found his voice, and Chicago was listening. Chapter 8. The Final Reckoning. 18 months after the restaurant revelation, Maxwell stood on the observation deck of Reed Tower, surveying his domain. Chicago stretched before him, its skyline now permanently altered by his vision. Construction on the south wing is 2 weeks ahead of schedule, reported Alicia Brennan, his chief operating officer. The Reed Foundation offices will be ready for occupancy next month, and the community innovation spaces shortly after. Excellent. And the Adler building renovation. Preservation specialists have approved our adaptive reuse plan. We're maintaining 80% of the original structure while achieving LEED Platinum certification. Maxwell nodded approvingly. The Adler building symbolized his personal journey. The site where his father had once worked now transformed into a beacon of sustainable development without erasing its industrial heritage. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking, Blake Sullivan sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for securities fraud. Justice delivered, precisely as anticipated. Maxwell had neither accelerated nor impeded the legal process. He had simply ensured Blake couldn't escape it through his usual channels of influence and obfuscation. One more item, Alicia said, checking her tablet. Catherine Zhang has requested an exclusive interview regarding the new Reed Media Group acquisition. Given your history with Chicago Society magazine, she's particularly interested in your decision to purchase its parent company. Schedule it for next week, and confirm our education initiative announcement to coincide with the interview. After Alicia departed, Maxwell remained on the observation deck, reflecting on the symmetry of recent developments. His acquisition of the media group that had once been Vanessa's social Bible represented the final piece of his reconstruction strategy, control of a narrative that had once controlled his ex-wife. His phone rang. Leo. Just heard about Sullivan's sentencing, his friend began. 7 years with possibility of parole after 5. Seems light considering the damage. It's appropriate, Maxwell replied. His cooperation helped dismantle 2 other fraudulent operations. Always the pragmatist, Leo chuckled. Speaking of pragmatism, Vanessa's employment at Vanguard is working out surprisingly well. Howard says she's actually quite skilled in their talent acquisition division. Unsurprising. Her social intuition was always exceptional. You really don't care that she's working at a company where you have significant influence? Maxwell considered the question. Her compartmentalized role poses no risk to my interests, and her rehabilitation serves the broader administrative efficiency of concluding legal matters. That's cold, even for you. Practical, Maxwell corrected. Holding grudges requires emotional energy better directed elsewhere. Leo snorted. Says the man who meticulously dismantled two people's entire lives over a restaurant insult. That wasn't a grudge, Leo. It was a necessary recalibration of circumstances. The conversation shifted to business matters, concluding with plans for the upcoming Reed Foundation Gala, the same charity event where Maxwell had first noticed Blake Sullivan's interest in Vanessa 2 years earlier. The circularity wasn't lost on him. Later that afternoon, Maxwell met with Howard Kessler at the Chicago Club to discuss Vanguard's management of certain Reed Group assets. Their business concluded efficiently. Howard hesitated before leaving. I should mention, your ex-wife has been promoted to Associate Director of Executive Recruitment. She's been remarkably effective, especially with candidates who might be intimidated by our traditional approach. I'm glad it's working out, Maxwell replied neutrally. Howard studied him. She's been discreet, never mentions your history or tries to leverage the connection. As expected, she's rebuilding her life pragmatically. She asks about you occasionally. Nothing inappropriate, just general questions about your public projects. Seems genuinely interested in your success. Maxwell absorbed this information without visible reaction. Professional curiosity, I'm sure. Howard looked unconvinced. Maybe, though she declined an opportunity to relocate to our New York office recently. Said she preferred to remain in Chicago despite the complicated history. Her reasons are her own. After Howard departed, Maxwell considered this new information. Vanessa declining career advancement to remain in Chicago was unexpected, potentially indicating unresolved emotional attachment rather than purely pragmatic career calculations. The thought was interrupted by another call, this time from Naomi Parker. The Sullivan Restitution Fund is finalized, she reported. Your anonymous contribution of $10 million ensures all smaller investors will be made whole. Good. Maintain the anonymity protocols. Of course, though I'm curious, why help his victims quietly when public philanthropy would boost the Reed Foundation profile? This isn't about profile, Maxwell explained. It's about proper resolution. Small investors shouldn't suffer for trusting the wrong advisor. The truth was more complex. Maxwell's contribution to the restitution fund served multiple strategic purposes. It demonstrated his commitment to market integrity, provided tax advantages through the foundation, and most importantly, it placed a final period on the Sullivan saga. Blake Sullivan's crime and punishment would be complete. The victims would be compensated. The story would end without lingering victims seeking justice, which might keep Blake's name in the news or, worse, generate sympathy for him. Maxwell had learned from his father's financial destruction that true closure required restoration, not just punishment. His revenge against Blake wasn't complete until the collateral damage was addressed. That evening, Maxwell attended a symphony gala alone, one of many social events he now navigated as one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors. His strategic self-revelation had brought unexpected attention from potential romantic partners, none of whom he'd found compelling enough to pursue seriously. During intermission, he encountered Dominic and Elaine Russell in the grand foyer. Maxwell, Elaine greeted him warmly. The Education Initiative announcement is wonderful. $20 million for STEM programs in underserved schools will make a tremendous difference. Research shows early intervention creates the greatest long-term impact, Maxwell replied. Always the calculated philanthropist, Dominic observed good-naturedly, though I suspect there's more heart behind it than you admit. Their conversation was interrupted by a ripple of awareness through the crowd. Maxwell turned to see Vanessa entering with a distinguished older man he recognized as Richard Townsend, chairman of the symphony board. Interesting, Dominic murmured. First time she's been seen at a major event since the scandal. Elaine touched Maxwell's arm gently. We can move to another area if you prefer. No need, Maxwell replied calmly. Our paths, occasionally crossing at public events, is inevitable. He observed Vanessa discreetly, noting the subtle differences in her appearance and demeanor. She was dressed elegantly, but conservatively, her manner more reserved than in the past. The entitled socialite had been replaced by someone more subdued, more conscious of perception. When her gaze inevitably found him across the room, Maxwell acknowledged her with a slight nod, the minimal courtesy appropriate between distant acquaintances. She returned the gesture similarly before continuing her conversation with Townsend. Remarkably civilized, Dominic commented. Civilization distinguishes us from chaos, Maxwell replied. Excuse me, I see the Vanguard board chairman has arrived. As he moved through the crowd, Maxwell felt an unexpected moment of clarity. His meticulous revenge strategy against Vanessa and Blake had succeeded completely. Their lives permanently altered, their status demolished, their futures constrained by consequences of their own making. Yet watching Vanessa cautiously rebuilding her life, carefully navigating the social world that had once embraced and then rejected her, Maxwell recognized that his victory was not in their destruction, but in his own liberation. He had emerged from the facade of his previous existence, fully formed in his authentic power, no longer constrained by the protective camouflage of perceived mediocrity. The bell signaling the end of intermission chimed, and Maxwell returned to his seat, alone but no longer hidden. That was his true revenge, not what he had taken from them, but what he had reclaimed for himself, the freedom to exist without pretense. 2 days later, Maxwell sat across from Catherine Zhang in his Reed Tower office for their scheduled interview about the Media Group acquisition. The purchase of Metropolitan Media surprised industry observers, Catherine began, particularly given your history with one of their publications. Chicago Society, you mean, Maxwell noted, an incidental connection. The acquisition was based on broader strategic alignment with Reed Group's community development initiatives. Catherine's skeptical expression suggested she wasn't convinced. Your ex-wife once described that magazine as her social Bible. Now you control it. Metropolitan's 12 publications serve diverse communities across Chicago. Their combined reach makes them valuable platforms for highlighting neighborhood revitalization efforts. Speaking of revitalization, Catherine shifted topics seamlessly. Blake Sullivan's sentencing closes a significant chapter in Chicago's financial history. Any comment on the outcome? Maxwell maintained his neutral expression. The legal system worked as designed. Beyond that, my focus remains on constructive development, not past controversies. Even when those controversies directly impacted your personal life? Especially then, Maxwell replied. Moving forward productively requires focusing on creation rather than grievance. When the interview concluded, Catherine lingered. Off the record, your transformation from invisible power broker to Chicago's most visible business leader has been remarkable. Yet I still sense there's a story behind the story. Maxwell allowed a slight smile. Isn't there always? The timing of your emergence, coinciding perfectly with your divorce and Sullivan's downfall. It's too neat to be coincidental. The universe often presents patterns that suggest design where there is only convergence. Catherine laughed. And sometimes there's a master strategist behind those patterns. One day, I hope you'll tell me the whole truth. One day, Maxwell agreed non-committally when the story is complete. Later that evening, as Maxwell reviewed architectural plans for the Adler building renovation, he received an unexpected delivery. A small package with no return address. Inside was a worn steel mill worker's identification badge with his father's name and photo, accompanied by a simple note, found while clearing old storage at the Adler building. Thought you should have this. V. Maxwell studied the badge, his father's proud expression captured decades ago, before economic devastation claimed his livelihood and dignity. The unexpected gesture from Vanessa stirred complex emotions. Her perception in recognizing the badge's significance suggesting deeper understanding than he'd credited her with. After a moment's reflection, Maxwell placed the badge carefully in his desk drawer and returned to his work. The past, both distant and recent, was acknowledged but not dwelled upon. His focus remained on the empire he was building in plain sight, the strategic moves still to come, and the legacy he would establish. The final reckoning wasn't about punishment delivered or vengeance achieved. It was about transcending the very need for revenge by creating something far greater than what had been lost. Chapter 9. The Silent Legacy. 5 years after the restaurant revelation, Maxwell Reed stood before the crowd gathered for the grand opening of Adler's Center, the fully renovated and reimagined industrial complex where his father had once worked. What had been a crumbling reminder of economic devastation was now a thriving mixed-use development combining affordable housing, technical education facilities, and incubator spaces for manufacturing startups. Progress doesn't require erasing history. Maxwell concluded his remarks. The Adler Center preserves our industrial heritage while creating new opportunities for the next generation of builders and creators. The applause was genuine, the atmosphere celebratory. In the 5 years since emerging from the shadows, Maxwell had transformed Chicago's urban landscape and business culture. Reed Tower anchored a revitalized downtown district. The Reed Restaurant Group had expanded nationally, and the Reed Foundation's education initiatives had become models for urban renewal across the country. Blake Sullivan remained in federal prison, his release still 2 years away. His cooperation had helped dismantle several other fraudulent investment operations, but his own reputation and future prospects were permanently diminished. The financial ecosystem he had exploited now operated under reforms partially shaped by Maxwell's influence on regulatory committees. As Maxwell mingled with guests following the ceremony, he spotted a familiar face among the crowd. Vanessa, accompanying Richard Townsend, now her husband of 2 years. Their paths crossed occasionally at civic events, their interactions unfailingly professional and distant. Remarkable achievement, Townsend said, approaching with Vanessa beside him. The preservation of the original forge elements while incorporating modern sustainability features is inspired. Thank you, Richard. The architectural team deserves the credit for the execution. But the vision was yours, Vanessa said quietly. You always understood the value of foundations. The observation was unexpectedly perceptive, acknowledging Maxwell's core philosophy without presuming intimacy. He nodded slightly, accepting the comment at face value. The Townsend Foundation's arts education program would complement the technical training facilities here, Richard suggested. Perhaps our teams should discuss potential collaboration. I'll have Alicia reach out to your director, Maxwell agreed. The brief exchange concluded with professional courtesy, Vanessa and Richard moving on to greet other attendees. Maxwell watched them go, noting the changes in his ex-wife. The performative social butterfly replaced by someone more substantive, more authentic in her community engagement. Leo appeared at his side. Civilized exchange with the former Mrs. Reed. Her foundation work with Townsend is legitimate, Maxwell noted. Their arts education programs show promising results. Remarkable rehabilitation from social parasite to philanthropic partner, Leo observed. Almost as if someone orchestrated the perfect punishment, stripping away her superficial existence to reveal whatever authentic potential remained. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. An interesting theory. Am I wrong? You're overestimating my influence. Vanessa's transformation is her own achievement. After you systematically dismantled her previous life, Leo pointed out, creating conditions where reinvention was her only viable option. Maxwell considered this perspective. Perhaps, though true change requires internal commitment, not just external pressure. Their conversation was interrupted by Dominic Russell, now chief of neurosurgery and a Reed Foundation board member. The educational facilities are extraordinary, Maxwell. The simulation technology will revolutionize technical training. Technology without purpose is just distraction, Maxwell replied. The Adler Center's success will be measured by the careers it launches, not its equipment. As the event continued, Maxwell found himself drawn to the preserved section of the original steel mill, a cavernous space where massive equipment had been refurbished and maintained as industrial sculpture. Here, his father had once operated a blast furnace, working punishing hours to support his family. In a quiet moment alone, Maxwell removed something from his pocket, his father's ID badge, the one Vanessa had returned years earlier. He placed it discreetly on a small shelf beside the restored control panel, a private tribute invisible to casual observers. A fitting tribute, came a voice behind him. Maxwell turned to find Catherine Zhang observing him. After 5 years of covering his business ventures, she had developed an uncanny ability to locate him during reflective moments. My father would have appreciated the resurrection of this place, Maxwell acknowledged. From abandonment to opportunity, Catherine noted. A pattern you've repeated across your projects. Transformation rather than destruction. Except when destruction serves your purpose, she observed shrewdly. Your former wife seems to have found her footing. Sullivan less so. Maxwell studied the perceptive journalist. You're still pursuing the theory that I orchestrated their downfall. Not pursuing, accepting as established fact. The question that interests me is why the difference in outcomes. Sullivan remains destroyed, while Vanessa has been allowed, perhaps even subtly assisted, in rebuilding a life of substance. An intriguing narrative, Maxwell replied neutrally. The truth, I suspect. Catherine's expression turned thoughtful. Sullivan betrayed his investors, strangers who trusted him with their financial futures. Vanessa betrayed her husband, one person who trusted her with his heart. In your moral calculation, one crime warranted permanent destruction, the other merely painful transformation. Maxwell remained silent, neither confirming nor denying her assessment. Your silence speaks volumes, Catherine said. The profile I'm writing for the 5th anniversary of Reed Tower will explore your business philosophy. I'm calling it The Silent Legacy, how your father's experience shaped your approach to power and responsibility. An ambitious angle. The most interesting part, Catherine continued, is how someone capable of such calculated retribution could simultaneously build one of the most progressive business empires in the country. Ruthlessness and vision, perfectly balanced. Principles without power accomplish nothing, Maxwell observed. Power without principles destroys everything, including those who betray your trust, Catherine concluded. A lesson Blake Sullivan learned permanently, while Vanessa received. What? A second chance. Everyone receives the consequences their actions create, Maxwell replied. My role has simply been to ensure those natural consequences aren't artificially avoided through privilege or connection. As Catherine departed with this cryptic exchange to ponder, Maxwell remained in the preserved industrial space, contemplating the journey of the past 5 years. His revenge against Blake and Vanessa had been meticulously executed, but with fundamentally different purposes. Blake Sullivan represented a predatory system Maxwell had determined to eliminate. His destruction was necessary for broader market reform and investor protection. Vanessa's transformation served as both justice for her betrayal and validation of Maxwell's original assessment of her potential buried beneath social climbing and status obsession. Later that evening, Maxwell hosted a smaller gathering in his Reed Tower penthouse for close associates and foundation board members. As conversations flowed around business initiatives and community impacts, Dominic Russell joined him on the terrace overlooking the illuminated city. 5 years of visible empire building, Dominic observed, versus how many years of invisible foundation laying? Nearly 20, Maxwell acknowledged, though the public emergence wasn't originally part of the plan. No? What changed? Maxwell considered how much to reveal. Let's just say certain events accelerated my timeline. The restaurant incident, Dominic nodded. Still the most masterfully executed response to public humiliation I've ever witnessed. It wasn't about the humiliation, Maxwell corrected. It was about recognizing that my strategic anonymity had outlived its purpose. And nothing to do with your ex-wife's betrayal? Dominic's skepticism was evident. That provided timing, not motivation. Dominic studied him thoughtfully. You know, most men in your position would have simply divorced her and moved on. The systematic dismantling of her social world, her lover's business empire, their reputations and futures, that suggests something deeper. Pattern correction, Maxwell explained. Their behavior represented systemic flaws in our financial and social structures. The valorization of appearance over substance, extraction over creation. Addressing those patterns required comprehensive intervention. So not revenge, but what? Social engineering. Restoration of proper balance. Dominic laughed softly. Remind me never to cross you, Maxwell. Your definition of balance is terrifying. As the evening concluded and guests departed, Maxwell remained alone on his terrace, contemplating the city he had helped reshape. 5 years of visible power had accomplished more than 20 years of silent influence, confirming his decision to emerge from the shadows. Blake Sullivan would eventually leave prison to face a world where his name remained synonymous with financial fraud, his future prospects permanently constrained by his past actions. Vanessa had found a more authentic path forward, her painful transformation yielding genuine growth, exactly as Maxwell had calculated when arranging the specific consequences of her betrayal. Maxwell himself had transcended his original revenge motivation, creating a legacy that extended far beyond personal vindication. The restaurant revelation had been merely the opening move in a far more significant game, the complete reconstruction of his public identity and influence. His father's ID badge now rested permanently in the preserved industrial space where generations of workers would learn new skills. The steelworker's son had fulfilled his silent promise, building something that could never be taken away, while ensuring those who betrayed trust faced the precise consequences their characters had earned. The final victory wasn't the destruction he had orchestrated, but the creation that followed, a legacy built in plain sight, no longer hidden behind carefully constructed modesty. That transformation from silent partner to visible force represented his true revenge against a world that had underestimated him and those who had betrayed him. Maxwell Reed had emerged from the shadows not by becoming someone new, but by finally revealing who he had been all along, a man of precise calculation, unyielding principles, and ruthless execution when crossed. The silent partner had found his voice, and Chicago would never be the same. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Deception. Jordan Boyer had built his life on two unshakable pillars, family and loyalty. At 42, he commanded respect as the owner of Boyer Security Solutions, a firm that specialized in high-end personal protection and corporate security. His military background, 12 years as a Special Forces operative, had taught him that survival depended on reading people correctly and never showing weakness to those who might exploit it. The Boyer family home in suburban Connecticut reflected Jordan's success, a sprawling colonial on 3 acres, complete with state-of-the-art security systems that he'd installed himself. Diana Boyer, his wife of 16 years, had always appreciated the finer things their lifestyle afforded. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and had once been the perfect partner for a man building an empire. Their daughter Emma, 15, was the light of Jordan's world, intelligent, spirited, and the only person who could make the hardened former soldier smile without reservation. Jordan's business partner, Charles Fry, had been part of their lives for 8 years. The partnership had been born from necessity. Charles brought the financial acumen and political connections that Jordan's military efficiency alone couldn't provide. Charles was smooth where Jordan was direct, diplomatic where Jordan was forceful. At 38, Charles possessed the kind of effortless charm that opened doors and loosened tongues. He was unmarried, claiming his dedication to the business left no time for relationships, a statement that had always rung false to Jordan's trained ear. The warning signs had been there for months, hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. Diana's new interest in yoga classes that ran unusually late, Her sudden enthusiasm for weekend spa retreats with friends Jordan had never met. The way she'd grown distant during family dinners, her attention drifting to her phone with increasing frequency. Emma had begun spending more time in her room, claiming homework demanded her full attention, but Jordan had noticed the shadows under her eyes and the way she sometimes flinched when Diana entered the room. Jordan's instincts, honed by years of combat and security work, had been screaming that something was wrong. But he'd ignored them, choosing to believe in the illusion of domestic peace. That had been his first mistake, and in Jordan Boyer's world, mistakes had consequences. The Boyer security offices occupied the top floor of a downtown Hartford building, with windows offering a commanding view of the Connecticut River. Jordan had designed the space to reflect strength and competence. Polished granite surfaces, awards and commendation from his military service, and photographs of successful operations with high-profile clients. Charles's office adjoined his, separated by a glass partition that could be made opaque at the touch of a button. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, Jordan was reviewing contracts for a new client when Charles knocked on his door. His partner entered with his usual confident stride, but Jordan's trained eye caught the subtle tells. The slight tension around Charles's eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them, the almost imperceptible hesitation before speaking. "Morning, Jordan. I wanted to discuss the Henderson account. Their security needs are more complex than we initially thought." Charles settled into the chair across from Jordan's desk, crossing his legs in a gesture that seemed too casual. Jordan studied his partner's face while they discussed business details. Charles had always been smooth, but lately there was something different, an undercurrent of satisfaction that seemed disconnected from their professional successes. It was the look of a man who believed he was getting away with something significant. After Charles left for a client meeting, Jordan remained at his desk, thinking. His daughter Emma would be home from school by now, probably starting her homework in the kitchen while Diana prepared dinner. It was a routine that had once brought him comfort, but now it felt like a performance stage for his benefit. That evening, Jordan arrived home to find Diana in the kitchen, moving with unusual nervous energy. She was preparing his favorite meal, grilled salmon with asparagus, but her movements lacked their usual grace. Emma sat at the kitchen island with her textbooks spread out, but her concentration seemed forced. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Jordan asked, kissing the top of Emma's head. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 15 years. "It was fine, Dad. Just the usual drama." Diana's knife paused for a fraction of a second as she diced vegetables. "What kind of drama?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Emma's gaze flickered between her parents. "Nothing important. Just friend stuff." Jordan sat beside his daughter, recognizing evasion when he heard it. In his security work, he'd learned that people usually lied to protect themselves or someone they cared about. The question was, who was Emma protecting? "Emma, you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Jordan's voice carried the gentle authority that had once calmed panicked clients under threat. For a moment, Emma's composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away. "I know, Dad. Sometimes things are complicated." Diana set down her knife and turned to face them, her expression unreadable. "Emma's been stressed about her college prep courses. Haven't you, honey?" The exchange felt rehearsed, and Jordan's instincts sharpened. Something was happening in his house, under his protection, and he was being kept in the dark. For a man who'd built his reputation on seeing threats before they materialized, the realization was both infuriating and galvanizing. After dinner, Jordan excused himself to his home office, a soundproofed room where he often worked on sensitive cases. He activated the security monitoring system, not to spy on his family, but to review the logs from recent weeks. The timestamps revealed patterns he'd been too trusting to notice. Diana's frequent afternoon absences, always during Emma's school hours. Phone calls to numbers not in their family plan. And most telling, gaps in the home security footage that suggested someone with administrative access had been editing the records. Jordan Boyer had spent his career protecting others from betrayal and violence. Now, it seemed, the threat had invaded his own home. As he sat in the darkness of his office, illuminated only by the glow of multiple monitors, one truth crystallized in his mind. Whoever was playing games with his family was about to discover that Jordan Boyer was not a man who forgave or forgot. The hunter had become the hunted, and the predators stalking his family were about to learn why that was a fatal mistake. Chapter 2: Shadows of Truth. The next morning brought an unseasonable warmth to Connecticut, but Jordan Boyer felt a chill that had nothing to do with weather. He'd spent the night analyzing security footage and phone records, and the patterns emerging painted a picture he wasn't ready to accept. Diana's deceptions weren't random. They were systematic, coordinated, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to involve Emma's compliance. Jordan arrived at the office early, before Charles or their small staff. He activated his personal security protocols, something he developed during his military days. When trust was compromised, verify everything. Using skills that had once helped him track terrorists across hostile territory, he began tracing the digital footprints of his wife's recent activities. Diana's credit card records revealed charges at restaurants Jordan had never heard of, at times when she claimed to be at yoga or with girlfriends. The locations clustered around the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where Boyer Security occasionally housed clients requiring discreet protection. Phone records showed regular calls to a disposable cell number, always lasting between 15 and 30 minutes, always during school hours when Emma would be away. Charles arrived at 9, his usual Tuesday routine including coffee and pastries from the bakery across the street. But today, Jordan noticed his partner's shoes, expensive Italian leather, the same brand Jordan had seen charged to Diana's credit card 3 weeks ago. A gift she claimed was for her brother's birthday. "Jordan, you're here early," Charles said, settling into his office. "Everything all right?" Through the glass partition, Jordan watched his partner's movements. Charles's phone buzzed, and he answered with a quick glance toward Jordan's office. The conversation was brief, but Jordan read his lips clearly enough to catch 2 words: "Not now." At 2:30 p.m., Jordan left the office claiming a client emergency. Instead, he drove to Emma's school, arriving just as classes ended. He parked across the street and waited, watching as students streamed out of the building. Emma appeared 20 minutes later, but instead of heading to the pickup area where Diana usually waited, she walked quickly toward the nearby Starbucks. Jordan followed at a distance, his training making him invisible among the afternoon shoppers. Inside the coffee shop, Emma sat at a corner table, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from across the room, Jordan could see she was crying. "Mom, I can't keep doing this." Emma's voice carried just far enough for Jordan to catch fragments. "He's going to find out. It's not fair to him." Jordan moved closer, positioning himself behind a display rack where he could observe without being seen. Emma's conversation continued, her distress obvious. "I know what you said about protecting the family, but Dad isn't the enemy here. Charles promised this would be over by now. I'm scared of what Dad will do when he finds out." The words hit Jordan like physical blows. His 15-year-old daughter was being used as a pawn in whatever game Diana and Charles were playing. The protective fury that had once driven him through enemy territory began building in his chest, cold and focused. Emma ended the call and sat staring at her phone, tears streaming down her face. Jordan's first instinct was to go to her, to demand answers, to end whatever was causing her pain. But his tactical mind overruled emotion. Moving too quickly would alert Diana and Charles, possibly making things worse for Emma. He needed more information before he acted. Jordan left the coffee shop and drove to the Marriott downtown. Using his security credentials and a carefully constructed story about investigating a threat to one of their high-profile guests, he gained access to the hotel's security office. The footage from the past month told the story his heart had been denying: Diana and Charles, arriving separately but meeting in the elevator. Their body language spoke of intimacy, shared secrets, and worst of all, planning. The final piece of evidence came from the hotel's restaurant receipts. Charged to room 1247, registered under Charles's name, were dinners for 3 people on 4 separate occasions over the past 6 weeks. The timestamps coincided with Emma's claimed tutoring sessions that Jordan now realized had never existed. Driving home that evening, Jordan's mind shifted into operational mode. His family was under attack from within, and his daughter was being traumatized by people she should have been able to trust. The situation required the same systematic approach he'd used in hostile territory: gather intelligence, identify weaknesses, plan decisive action, and execute without mercy. At home, Diana greeted him with a smile that now looked plastic, carefully applied. "How was your day, honey? You seem tense." "Just the usual client demands," Jordan replied, studying her face. "How was your yoga class?" Diana's smile flickered for just a moment. "Challenging." The instructor introduced some new poses that really tested our flexibility. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She looked at her father with an expression that broke his heart, love mixed with fear and guilt. "Dad, can we talk later?" "About things." Jordan felt the weight of his daughter's burden, carried alone for too long. "Of course, sweetheart. Whenever you're ready." Diana moved quickly to the stove, her movements sharp with anxiety. "Emma, why don't you help me with dinner? Your father's had a long day." The protective positioning was subtle but clear to Jordan's trained eye. Diana was trying to control the conversation, to limit Emma's access to him. It was a tactical error that revealed just how desperate the situation had become. That night, after Diana fell asleep, Emma knocked softly on Jordan's office door. She entered hesitantly, like a soldier approaching a commanding officer with bad news. "Dad, I need to tell you something, but I'm scared." Jordan turned from his desk, giving his daughter his full attention. "Emma, there's nothing you could tell me that would make me love you less. But there are things you could keep from me that might make it impossible for me to protect you." The words seemed to unlock something in Emma. She collapsed into the chair across from his desk and began to cry. Not the careful tears he'd witnessed at the coffee shop, but the desperate sobs of a child who'd been carrying an adult's burden for too long. "Mom and Uncle Charles, they're together, Dad. And they made me promise not to tell you because they said it would destroy our family. But it's destroying me instead." Jordan moved around the desk and pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her tremble against him. The rage building inside him was nuclear, but his voice remained gentle. "How long, sweetheart?" "Since the summer. Mom said Charles was helping her plan a surprise for your birthday, but then I saw them at the hotel. They took me to dinner and explained that adults sometimes have complicated relationships and that you could never understand because you're too rigid about loyalty." The psychological manipulation of his child ignited something primordial in Jordan Boyer. They hadn't just betrayed him. They'd weaponized his daughter's love and loyalty, turning her into an accomplice in her own father's humiliation. "Emma, listen to me carefully. None of this is your fault. None of it. Adults who put children in these positions are the ones who are wrong, not the children who get caught in the middle." Emma pulled back to look at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Jordan's smile was cold and precise, the expression his enemies had learned to fear. "I'm going to fix this, sweetheart, and I'm going to make sure no one ever puts you in this position again." As Emma finally slept peacefully for the first time in months, Jordan returned to his office and began planning. Charles Fry and Diana Boyer had made the mistake of assuming that loyalty was weakness, that trust was stupidity. They were about to learn that Jordan Boyer's greatest strength wasn't his military training or his business acumen. It was his absolute commitment to protecting what he loved, no matter the cost to those who threatened it. The war had begun, but they didn't know it yet. That would be their final mistake. Chapter 3: The Calm Before the Storm. Jordan Boyer had learned in the military that the most dangerous enemy was one who didn't know he was under attack. For the next 2 weeks, he played the role of the unsuspecting husband while methodically gathering intelligence and preparing his counteroffensive. Every smile at Diana felt like swallowing glass. Every handshake with Charles like touching a loaded weapon, but Jordan's discipline held firm. Emma's relief at sharing her burden was obvious. The dark circles under her eyes faded, and she began eating normally again. Jordan made sure to spend extra time with her, taking her out for father-daughter dinners and helping with her college applications. During these moments, Emma gradually revealed more details about how Diana and Charles had manipulated her. "They said you were too controlling, Dad, that you'd overreact and probably hurt someone if you found out. Mom said Charles was helping her find ways to make you less intense." Emma's voice carried the confusion of a teenager trying to understand adult deceptions. They made it sound like they were protecting you from yourself. Jordan filed away each revelation, building a psychological profile of his enemy's tactics. They'd painted him as unstable, potentially violent, setting the stage for some future narrative where they would be the victims of his unreasonable response to their harmless affair. At Boyer Security, Jordan began implementing what he called succession planning. He gradually shifted Charles's access to sensitive accounts and information, claiming it was part of a broader reorganization to prepare for their upcoming expansion. Charles accepted the changes with minimal resistance, too focused on his personal schemes to recognize a professional death spiral. Jordan's research into Charles's background revealed fascinating details he'd never bothered to investigate during their partnership. Charles Fry wasn't just unfaithful, he was pathologically opportunistic. His previous business ventures showed a pattern of charming his way into partnerships, then systematically undermining his collaborators while positioning himself to take control. Diana wasn't his first married woman. She was simply his most financially promising conquest. The breakthrough came when Jordan discovered Charles's storage unit, rented under a false name, but paid for with a credit card linked to Boyer Security's corporate account. Using his security contacts, Jordan gained access and found boxes of documents, financial records, photographs, and most damning of all, recordings of Diana discussing Jordan's business dealings, client lists, and personal information that could be used for blackmail or corporate espionage. Charles hadn't just seduced Diana. He'd turned her into an intelligence asset against her own husband. The recordings were extensive, dating back almost a year. Diana's voice, initially hesitant, grew more confident as she provided details about Jordan's high-profile clients, their security arrangements, and their personal vulnerabilities. The final recording, dated just 3 days ago, featured Diana and Charles discussing their timeline. Jordan's military pension vests fully next year. Diana's voice was clinical, businesslike. Once we have the client list secured and the offshore accounts established, we can file for divorce. With the right attorney, I'll get half of everything, plus child support. Jordan will be too proud to fight dirty. Charles's response chilled Jordan's blood. And if he does fight dirty, we have enough information about his clients to create significant legal problems for him. A man with his background, involved with the kind of people he protects, the authorities would love to investigate those connections. They weren't just planning to leave him. They were preparing to destroy him professionally and personally, using his daughter as a weapon and his honor as a weakness. That evening, Jordan sat in his office reviewing financial records with newfound urgency. Boyer Security's accounts showed subtle irregularities, expense reports that didn't quite add up, client payments that had been redirected to secondary accounts Charles controlled, and invoices for services that Jordan couldn't verify. The theft was sophisticated, designed to be discovered only after Charles had vanished with his stolen fortune. Jordan's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, Mom's going out tonight. Says she has a book club meeting." I know it's not true. The final confirmation came at 9:47 p.m. when Jordan's surveillance of the Marriott showed Diana entering the hotel lobby. She moved with the confident stride of a woman who believed her secrets were safe, her deceptions undetected. Jordan drove home and found Emma in the kitchen, pretending to study but clearly waiting for him. "Emma, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to trust me completely." His daughter looked up with eyes that held more maturity than any 15-year-old should possess. "What do you need?" "Tomorrow, I'm going to confront your mother and Charles. It's going to be ugly, and there will be consequences. I need you to stay with your Uncle Frank for a few days while I handle this." Frank Boyer, Jordan's older brother, was a federal prosecutor who understood the importance of protecting family while ensuring justice was served. He would keep Emma safe while Jordan did what needed to be done. Emma nodded solemnly. "Will Mom be okay?" Jordan's smile was grim. "Your mother made her choices, sweetheart. Now she gets to live with the consequences. But you're innocent in all this, and I'll make sure everyone knows that." The next morning, Jordan implemented the final phase of his intelligence gathering. Using Boyer Security's legitimate surveillance capabilities, he documented Diana and Charles's meeting at the hotel, their discussion in the restaurant, and their return to room 1247. The footage was comprehensive, time-stamped, and legally obtained through the hotel's existing security contract with Boyer Security. At 3 p.m., Jordan's phone rang. Charles's voice was casual, unsuspecting. "Jordan, I need to leave early today. Client emergency in New York. I'll be back tomorrow." "No problem, Charles. Handle what you need to handle." Jordan hung up, knowing it was the last conversation they would have as partners. By tomorrow, Charles Fry would understand that his greatest mistake hadn't been betraying Jordan Boyer's trust. It had been underestimating the consequences of that betrayal. That evening, Emma packed her bags for Uncle Frank's house, moving with the quiet efficiency of a soldier preparing for deployment. As Jordan drove her to her uncle's place, she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Dad, what are you going to do to them?" Jordan considered his answer carefully. Emma had been through enough trauma. She didn't need to carry the weight of his plans. "I'm going to make sure they can never hurt our family again. And I'm going to ensure that everyone understands what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness." Emma studied his profile in the dim light of the dashboard. "They really don't know you at all, do they?" Jordan's smile was cold and final. "No, sweetheart, they really don't." As he drove home alone, Jordan Boyer felt the familiar calm that had always preceded his most dangerous missions. Diana and Charles had spent months planning his destruction, using his daughter as a weapon and his trust as a tool. Tomorrow, they would discover that their carefully constructed plan had one fatal flaw. They had confused Jordan Boyer's capacity for love with his capacity for mercy. Those were two very different things, and the distinction was about to become brutally clear. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. Jordan Boyer awoke at 5 a.m. on the day he would destroy his enemies. His routine was methodical, purposeful, the same preparation he'd followed before every high-stakes operation during his military service. Black coffee, tactical clothing that looked professional but allowed for complete freedom of movement, and a final review of his plan. The beauty of Jordan's approach lay in its simplicity. He would use the legal system and Charles's own greed to construct a trap from which there would be no escape. By 6 a.m., he was at Boyer Security's offices, implementing the final phase of his preparation. Jordan activated his executive privilege to access all company financial records, downloading everything to encrypted drives. He then triggered the automated security protocol he'd installed years ago, a system that would lock Charles out of all company accounts and systems the moment Jordan entered a specific code. Charles would arrive at work to find himself digitally exiled from the company he'd been systematically robbing. At 7:30 a.m., Jordan placed a call to Detective Randy Connor of the Hartford Police Department's White-Collar Crime Division. Randy had been a client of Boyer Security, and Jordan had once saved his daughter from a kidnapping attempt by her non-custodial father. The debt of gratitude ran deep. "Randy, it's Jordan Boyer. I need to report corporate theft and fraud by my business partner. I have extensive documentation and surveillance footage. How quickly can you meet?" Within an hour, Detective Connor sat in Jordan's office reviewing the evidence. Charles's storage unit filled with stolen documents, the offshore accounts funded by money diverted for Boyer Security, and most damning of all, the recordings of Diana providing confidential client information. "Jesus, Jordan, this isn't just theft, it's corporate espionage. Some of your clients are federal officials, foreign diplomats. This could be a national security issue." Randy's expression was grim. "How long have you known?" "I discovered it yesterday. My first priority was gathering enough evidence to ensure conviction. Charles Fry is smart, connected, and charming. I needed an airtight case." Randy studied the financial records with the practiced eye of a veteran investigator. The theft alone is good for 10 years. The espionage charges could put him away for life. "What about your wife's involvement?" Jordan's jaw tightened. Diana was manipulated by Charles, used as an asset. She provided information under the belief that she was helping him plan a business surprise for me. I want him prosecuted to the full extent of the law. As for Diana, Jordan paused, his voice becoming colder. Her punishment will be more personal. At 9:15 a.m., Charles arrived at the office with his usual confident swagger, completely unaware that his digital world had already collapsed. Jordan watched through the glass partition as Charles attempted to log into his computer, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as system after system denied him access. Charles knocked on Jordan's door, his charm beginning to crack around the edges. "Jordan, I'm having some technical issues. All my access seems to be down. Come in, Charles. We need to talk." Charles entered and took his usual seat, but Jordan remained standing, a position of dominance that immediately shifted the dynamic. "Charles, I'm going to give you one chance to explain the $50,000 missing from our operating account, the client files in your storage unit, and the recordings of my wife discussing confidential business matters." The color drained from Charles's face, but his training in deception kicked in quickly. "Jordan, I don't know what you're talking about. If there are financial irregularities, we should contact our accountant. The Hartford police are already reviewing our accounts. Detective Connor is preparing arrest warrants as we speak. The only question now is whether you want to cooperate or let the federal authorities handle the espionage charges." Charles's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "You always were too rigid, Jordan. Too black and white. The business world requires flexibility, compromise. The business world requires trust. You violated that trust, stole from our clients, and used my family as weapons against me. That's not flexibility, Charles. That's betrayal." Charles stood abruptly, his demeanor shifting to open hostility. "Diana told me you'd react like this. All emotion, no logic. She's tired of living with a man who sees the world as a war zone. At least I could offer her a life of sophistication, of..." Jordan's movement was so swift that Charles didn't see it coming. One moment they were talking, the next Charles was pressed against the wall, Jordan's forearm across his throat, applying just enough pressure to communicate absolute serious intent without causing permanent damage. "Charles, I want you to listen very carefully. My wife may have been fooled by your charm, but I know exactly what you are. You're a predator who saw an opportunity and took it. You used my daughter's love for her mother to keep her silent about your manipulation. That's unforgivable." Jordan released the pressure slightly, allowing Charles to breathe. "The police will be here in 30 minutes. You can run, but the federal warrants will follow you anywhere in the world, or you can stay and face the consequences of your choices like a man." Charles's response was a sneer that revealed his true nature. "You think you've won? Diana's already filed for divorce. She'll get half of everything, including this company. And Emma? She'll understand eventually that her mother deserves happiness, even if you're too selfish to." Jordan's hand moved to Charles's throat again, this time with unmistakable lethal intent. "If you ever mention my daughter again, the police will be investigating a very different kind of crime. Do we understand each other?" Charles nodded frantically, and Jordan stepped back. At that moment, Detective Connor appeared in the doorway with two uniformed officers. "Charles Fry, you're under arrest for corporate theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage." As they read Charles's rights and led him away in handcuffs, Jordan felt the first wave of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. Charles would spend the next decade in federal prison, his charm useless against concrete walls and steel bars. But Charles was just the opening move. Diana's reckoning was yet to come, and it would be far more personal, far more devastating, and completely legal. At 11 a.m., Jordan drove home to find Diana in the kitchen, apparently preparing lunch with unusual enthusiasm. She looked up as he entered, her smile bright but nervous. "Jordan, you're home early. I thought you had meetings all day. My schedule cleared up unexpectedly. Diana, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her freeze, her smile becoming brittle. "What about?" Jordan placed a tablet on the kitchen counter and pressed play. Diana's voice filled the room, discussing Jordan's clients and their security arrangements with Charles. As the recording played, Jordan watched his wife's face cycle through denial, fear, and finally, desperate calculation. "Jordan, I can explain. Charles said he needed that information for her. For planning to destroy me professionally and personally while stealing my money and manipulating my daughter." Jordan's voice carried the cold precision of a military tribunal. "Diana, Charles was arrested this morning. He's facing federal charges that will put him in prison for the rest of his life. Diana's composure cracked completely. You don't understand. Charles and I, we love each other. He was going to take care of me, give me a life built on betraying your husband and traumatizing your daughter. Jordan's interruption was surgical in its precision. Diana, you have a choice to make. You can walk away from this marriage quietly with a reasonable settlement that allows you to start over. Or you can fight me in court, where these recordings and your participation in corporate espionage will become public record. Diana's face hardened, revealing a coldness Jordan had never seen before. You can't threaten me, Jordan. I know your secrets too. I know about your clients, your methods. My methods are legal and documented. Your boyfriend's methods landed him in federal custody. Choose wisely, Diana. For the first time in their marriage, Jordan saw his wife clearly, not as the woman he'd loved, but as the calculating opportunist she'd become. The grief of that realization was profound, but it was also liberating. Diana Boyer had made her choice months ago when she decided to betray her family. Now she would live with the consequences of that choice, one way or another. Chapter 5. The Hunt Intensifies. Diana Boyer had underestimated her husband's capacity for strategic thinking, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Over the next 3 days, while Charles sat in federal detention awaiting trial, Diana launched her own counteroffensive with the desperation of a cornered predator. Jordan returned home Wednesday evening to find his house emptied of Diana's belongings and a legal notice taped to the refrigerator. Diana had filed for emergency divorce proceedings, claiming domestic abuse and threatening behavior. The petition requested immediate restraining orders, temporary spousal support, and emergency custody of Emma pending a full hearing. Jordan read the document with the detached professionalism of a man reviewing an enemy's battle plan. Diana's attorney, Matthew Clark, a high-priced divorce specialist known for destroying men in custody battles, had crafted a narrative that painted Jordan as a controlling, potentially violent ex-soldier who had threatened his wife's lover and was using his security business to intimidate witnesses. The restraining order would prevent Jordan from accessing his own home or contacting his wife. The emergency custody petition claimed that Emma was in danger from her father's increasingly erratic and violent behavior following the discovery of Diana's friendship with Charles. Diana's masterstroke was the domestic abuse allegation. She claimed Jordan had a history of intimidating behavior, that his military background made him dangerous, and that his discovery of her relationship with Charles had triggered violent threats. She had even provided photographs of bruising on her arm, bruising that Jordan knew hadn't come from him. But Diana had made a crucial error. She'd underestimated Jordan's preparation and overestimated her own cleverness. Jordan immediately called his attorney, Frank Lamb, a former military lawyer who specialized in defending veterans against false allegations. Frank arrived at Jordan's office within an hour, reviewing the divorce petition with the intensity of a general studying enemy positions. Jordan, these are serious allegations. If they stick, you could lose Emma, the house, and potentially face criminal charges. What's your response? Jordan activated his office's secure presentation system, displaying the comprehensive surveillance footage he'd been gathering for weeks. Frank, meet the real Diana Boyer. The evidence was devastating. Diana and Charles entering and leaving the hotel together, their intimate dinners, their discussions in the restaurant about using Jordan's client information, and most damning of all, footage from that very morning showing Diana meeting with Matthew Clark at his office, 2 hours before she'd filed the restraining order, claiming she was afraid to contact an attorney due to Jordan's threats. Frank studied the timeline with professional admiration. She's claiming you threatened her Monday night, but here's footage of her calmly planning legal strategy Tuesday morning. This destroys her credibility. There's more. Jordan displayed the audio recordings. Diana provided confidential client information to Charles for almost a year. She's not just an adulterous wife. She's an accomplice to federal crimes. The final piece of evidence was medical records showing Diana's recent visits to a plastic surgeon. Visits that coincided with the dates she claimed Jordan had physically abused her. The bruising in her photographs wasn't from domestic violence. It was from cosmetic procedures she'd had done to support her false allegations. Frank's smile was predatory. "Jordan, by tomorrow morning, Diana Boyer is going to wish she'd taken your original offer. This evidence doesn't just refute her claims. It exposes her as a calculating criminal willing to destroy her family for financial gain." That evening, Jordan drove to his brother Frank Boyer's house to see Emma. She was waiting in the living room, her face pale with worry. "Dad, Mom called. She said terrible things about you, that you threatened her and Charles, that you might hurt me too. I told her she was lying, but she sounded so scared." Jordan sat beside his daughter, choosing his words carefully. "Emma, your mother is trying to rewrite history to justify her actions. The woman who called you isn't the mother you grew up with. She's someone who's desperate to avoid consequences for her choices." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Why is she doing this? Why can't she just admit she was wrong and try to fix things? Because some people, when they're caught in lies, double down instead of taking responsibility. Your mother has convinced herself that she's the victim in this situation, which means everyone else, including you and me, becomes the enemy. Jordan's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. "Drop the charges against Charles or Emma gets hurt." Some accidents are hard to prevent. Jordan's blood turned to ice. They weren't just threatening him anymore. They were threatening his daughter. He immediately called Detective Connor, forwarding the threatening message. Within minutes, Randy arrived at Frank Boyer's house with 2 patrol units. "Jordan, this escalates everything. Threatening a minor is federal territory. I'm calling the FBI." But Jordan's mind was already shifting into combat mode. Threatening Emma was the line that transformed this from a legal battle into a war. Diana and her allies had just declared war on his daughter, and they were about to learn what happened when someone made Jordan Boyer's child a target. "Randy, I want full protection for Emma. Round-the-clock surveillance, the works. And I want to trace that phone number." The trace led to a burner phone purchased with cash, but Jordan's security cameras had recorded every vehicle that had passed his house in the past week. Cross-referencing the footage with the timestamp of the threatening message revealed a black sedan parked across from his house when the text was sent. The sedan was registered to a private investigator named Dean Nash, a man with a history of working for Matthew Clark's law firm on contested divorce cases. Dean's specialty was intimidation and evidence fabrication, exactly the kind of dirty tactics Diana's attorney was known for employing. Jordan's response was swift and merciless. Using his security firm's resources, he compiled a comprehensive dossier on Dean Nash, his history of witness intimidation, his connections to corrupt attorneys, and most importantly, his outstanding warrants in 2 other states for assault and extortion. By midnight, Dean Nash was in custody, arrested by federal agents on the outstanding warrants. His phone contained not just the threatening message to Jordan, but dozens of similar threats to other divorce targets, as well as recorded conversations with Matthew Clark discussing pressure tactics for reluctant clients. Matthew Clark's law practice collapsed overnight as the FBI raided his offices, seizing evidence of systematic witness intimidation, perjury, and extortion. Diana had chosen the wrong attorney, one whose criminal activities would now expose her own false allegations to federal scrutiny. But Diana's most devastating mistake was yet to be revealed. In her desperation to destroy Jordan, she had contacted Charles in federal detention, offering to provide additional information about Jordan's business in exchange for Charles's testimony against her husband. Federal prisons record all inmate communications. Diana's conversations with Charles, promising to fabricate evidence and perjure herself in court, were now part of the federal investigation into Charles's crimes. When Jordan received the call from Detective Connor Thursday morning, the satisfaction in his voice was unmistakable. "Jordan, Diana Boyer was arrested an hour ago on federal charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Her communications with Charles Fry constitute additional crimes beyond the original espionage charges." Jordan felt the cold satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Diana had escalated the conflict, threatened his daughter, and chosen to fight dirty. Now she would face the consequences of those choices in federal court, where her charm and manipulation tactics would be useless against the weight of recorded evidence. But the war wasn't over yet. Diana still had allies, people who believed her version of events, people who might be willing to help her escape the consequences of her actions. Jordan Boyer had learned long ago that victory wasn't achieved by defeating the primary enemy. It was achieved by eliminating every threat to the people he protected. Diana Boyer and Charles Fry were neutralized, but their network of enablers and accomplices remained. Jordan's hunt was just beginning, and before it ended, everyone who had participated in threatening his daughter would understand why that had been a fatal mistake. Chapter 6: The Dominoes Fall. With Diana in federal custody and Charles facing life imprisonment, Jordan Boyd turned his attention to the broader network that had enabled their betrayal. His military training had taught him that individual enemies were rarely isolated threats. They were part of systems that required complete dismantling to ensure lasting security. Jordan's investigation revealed that Diana and Charles's relationship wasn't just personal. It was part of a larger scheme involving Matthew Clark's law firm. Clark specialized in orchestrating high-asset divorces by first destroying the target's spouse through character assassination, false allegations, and systematic intimidation. Diana hadn't just been an adulterous wife. She'd been recruited as an asset in a criminal enterprise. The FBI's raid on Clark's offices revealed the scope of the operation. Over the past 5 years, Clark's firm had stolen millions from divorce targets through fabricated evidence, witness intimidation, and judicial corruption. Diana and Charles's plan to destroy Jordan wasn't unique. It was a proven business model that had victimized dozens of successful men across Connecticut. Jordan's security firm became the Federal Investigation's unofficial headquarters. His surveillance capabilities, combined with his access to high-level corporate and government security networks, provided investigators with evidence that would have taken them months to gather independently. The investigation revealed that Dean Nash, the private investigator who had threatened Emma, was just one of several criminals Clark employed for intimidation work. The network included corrupt court officials, compromised forensic accountants, and even a judge who had been taking bribes to rule in Clark's favor during custody hearings. As federal agents made arrests across the state, Jordan received a call that would reshape his understanding of the entire situation. "Mr. Boyer, this is Agent Jennifer Delaney with the FBI. We need to discuss your daughter Emma's role in this investigation." Jordan's blood chilled. "My daughter is 15 years old. She's not involved in any criminal activity." "No, sir, she's not. But she's been recording conversations with your wife for the past 2 months. Emma Boyer has been working as an unofficial informant, gathering evidence of her mother's criminal activities." The revelation hit Jordan like a physical blow. Emma hadn't just been a victim of Diana and Charles's manipulation. She'd been actively working to expose them, carrying the burden of evidence gathering alone while protecting her father from the truth until she could ensure his safety. Agent Delaney continued, "Emma contacted us 6 weeks ago through the FBI's anonymous tip line. She provided recordings of her mother discussing plans to frame you for domestic abuse, fabricate evidence, and coordinate with Charles Fry to steal your business assets. Your daughter has been incredibly brave, Mr. Boyer." Jordan drove immediately to his brother's house, where Emma was waiting with the composed demeanor of a young woman who had been carrying adult responsibilities for too long. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything, but I knew if you acted too quickly, they might escape or hurt someone. I needed enough evidence to make sure they couldn't wiggle out of the consequences." Jordan pulled his daughter into his arms, overwhelmed by pride and horror at what she'd endured. "Emma, you shouldn't have had to handle this alone." "But I wasn't alone, Dad. I had Uncle Frank helping me understand the legal issues, and Agent Delaney made sure I knew how to safely record conversations without putting myself in danger. I learned from the best. You taught me that protecting family means sometimes doing hard things." Emma's recordings were devastating. Diana discussing her plans to claim domestic abuse, her coordination with Matthew Clark to fabricate evidence, and most chilling of all, her willingness to destroy Jordan professionally even if it meant Emma would lose her college fund and future opportunities. "She kept saying I'd understand when I was older." Emma's voice was steady but cold. that sometimes you have to sacrifice some people to save others. She said Dad was too rigid to adapt to changing circumstances, so removing him was actually a kindness. The psychological manipulation of his daughter ignited something primal in Jordan. Diana hadn't just betrayed him. She'd attempted to corrupt Emma's moral compass, turning her into an accomplice in her own father's destruction. But Emma had instead become the architect of her mother's downfall, gathering evidence with the patience and precision of a trained intelligence operative. Jordan realized his daughter had inherited more than just his protective instincts. She'd inherited his strategic mind and his unwavering commitment to justice. Over the next week, the arrest continued. Judge Milton Shepard, who had presided over dozens of Clark's divorce cases, was arrested for accepting bribes and fixing custody decisions. Court clerk Sonia Godfrey was charged with falsifying documents and selling confidential case information. The corruption extended from street-level criminals like Dean Nash all the way to the state's superior court system. Charles Frey's interrogation revealed additional co-conspirators. Facing life imprisonment, he provided information about other business partners he'd betrayed, clients he'd defrauded, and offshore accounts where stolen money had been hidden. His charm had finally failed him completely. Faced with concrete evidence and certain conviction, he became a cooperative witness eager to reduce his sentence. Diana's situation was more complex. Her federal charges were serious, but her cooperation could potentially reduce her sentence from decades to years. Agent Delaney offered Jordan the opportunity to influence Diana's plea agreement. "Mr. Boyer, your wife's information has been valuable in uncovering the broader conspiracy. If she continues to cooperate and provides testimony against the remaining defendants, we could recommend a reduced sentence. What are your thoughts?" Jordan's response was immediate and final. "Agent Delaney, my wife threatened my daughter, participated in federal crimes, and attempted to destroy an innocent man's life for financial gain. I want her prosecuted to the full extent of the law. No deals, no reductions, no mercy." The message was clear. Jordan Boyer was not interested in reconciliation, forgiveness, or second chances. Diana had made her choice when she'd involved Emma in her criminal conspiracy. Now she would face the full consequences of that choice. The media attention was intense, but carefully managed. Jordan's military record and his reputation in the security industry made him a sympathetic figure, a decorated veteran whose family had been destroyed by criminals who had specifically targeted him for his success and integrity. Emma handled the attention with remarkable poise, giving carefully crafted interviews that portrayed her as a brave young woman who had protected her father from a criminal conspiracy. Her composure and intelligence impressed everyone who met her, and several Ivy League universities reached out with early admission offers. As the trials began, Jordan sat in the courthouse watching his wife and her co-conspirators face justice. Diana's attempts to claim victimhood fell flat against the mountain of evidence Emma had gathered. Her recorded voice, planning Jordan's destruction with casual cruelty, destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. Charles Frey received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Matthew Clark got 30 years. Judge Shepard was sentenced to 15 years and lost his pension. Dean Nash received 12 years for his intimidation and extortion activities. Diana Boyer was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy, witness tampering, and her role in the corporate espionage against Jordan's clients. She would be 52 when released, her beauty faded, her charm irrelevant, and her future reduced to the consequences of her choices. At the sentencing hearing, Jordan was given the opportunity to address the court. His statement was brief and final. "Your Honor, the defendants targeted my family because they believe my loyalty and trust made me vulnerable. They were wrong. My loyalty and trust made me patient enough to gather the evidence needed to ensure they faced the full consequences of their crimes. They mistook restraint for weakness. That was their final mistake." As Diana was led away in shackles, she looked back at Jordan one last time. He met her gaze with the cold satisfaction of a man who had protected his family from predators and ensured they could never threaten innocent people again. Justice had been served, but Jordan Boyer's work wasn't finished. He had one final phase to complete, rebuilding his life and ensuring that Emma's future remained bright despite the darkness her mother had brought into their world. Chapter 7: Reconstruction and Renewal. With the criminal conspiracy dismantled and his enemies imprisoned, Jordan Boyer faced the challenge of rebuilding his life and his business while ensuring Emma's emotional recovery from the trauma of her mother's betrayal. The victory in court had been absolute, but victory always came with a cost that extended beyond the defeated enemies. Boyer's security had survived the investigation stronger than before. Federal agencies, impressed by Jordan's cooperation and the quality of his intelligence gathering, awarded his firm several lucrative government contracts. The publicity from the case, carefully managed to emphasize Jordan's integrity and Emma's courage, brought new high-profile clients who valued working with a man who had proven his loyalty under the ultimate test. Jordan restructured the company completely, installing multiple oversight systems to prevent any future partner from gaining the access Charles had abused. He promoted several trusted employees to leadership positions and established an employee ownership program that gave his people a stake in the company's success. Emma's recovery was Jordan's primary concern. Despite her remarkable strength during the investigation, she was still a 15-year-old girl who had lost her mother to federal prison and learned that the woman who raised her was capable of profound cruelty. Jordan arranged for her to work with Dr. Melinda Ballard, a psychologist who specialized in helping children of incarcerated parents. Emma is processing grief for a mother who is still alive but essentially dead to her, Dr. Ballard explained to Jordan during one of their consultations. She's mourning not just the loss of Diana, but the realization that the Diana she loved may never have existed at all. Emma threw herself into her studies and college preparation with the same intensity she'd brought to gathering evidence against her mother. Her early admission offers had grown to include Harvard, Yale, and MIT. Institutions impressed not just by her academic record, but by her demonstration of character under extraordinary circumstances. One evening, as Jordan was reviewing security protocols in his home office, Emma knocked on the door with an expression he'd learned to recognize. She had something important to discuss. "Dad, I've been thinking about Mom's sentencing hearing. When she looked back at you, what did you feel?" Jordan considered his answer carefully. Emma deserved honesty, but she also deserved protection from the darker aspects of his psychological makeup. "I felt satisfied that justice had been served. Your mother and her accomplices will never be able to hurt innocent families again. But did you feel sad? Or angry, or anything else?" Jordan studied his daughter's face, recognizing that she was trying to understand her own complex emotions about her mother's fate. "Emma, I felt relief. For months, I had been living with enemies in my own house, threats to the person I love most in the world. When your mother was sentenced, that threat was finally eliminated. I'm not capable of feeling sympathy for people who threaten you." Emma nodded slowly. "I keep thinking I should miss her, but I don't. The woman in prison isn't the mother I remember. Maybe that mother never existed. It's like mourning someone who died, except they're still alive and still dangerous." Jordan's heart ached for his daughter's pain, but he was also proud of her clarity. Emma had inherited his ability to see truth clearly, even when that truth was painful. "Emma, you don't owe your mother anything. Not love, not forgiveness, not even sympathy. She made choices that destroyed your ability to have a normal relationship with her. That's her fault, not yours." During this period of reconstruction, Jordan received an unexpected visitor. Frank Boyer knocked on his office door one afternoon with a grave expression. "Jordan, we need to discuss Diana's appeals process. Her new attorney is claiming prosecutorial misconduct and trying to get her conviction overturned. Diana's new legal team, funded by her family's remaining assets, was arguing that the FBI had violated her rights by using Emma as an informant without parental consent. They claimed Jordan had manipulated a minor child to gather evidence against her mother, making Emma's recordings inadmissible. The appeal was legally complex but factually weak. Emma had contacted the FBI independently, without Jordan's knowledge or influence. Her decision to gather evidence had been her own, driven by her recognition that her mother was committing crimes and threatening her father. Agent Delaney met with Jordan to discuss the appeal strategy. Mr. Boyer, Emma's testimony will be crucial. The defense is going to try to portray her as a child who was manipulated by you into betraying her mother. We need to demonstrate that Emma acted independently, with full understanding of her actions. Emma's response to the appeal was characteristically direct. Dad, Mom's lawyers want to claim I was too young to understand what I was doing? Let them try. I'll testify about every conversation, every lie, every threat she made. I'll show the jury exactly how well I understood the situation. The appeals hearing became a second trial, with Emma as the star witness. Her testimony was devastating to Diana's claims of innocence. Speaking clearly and confidently, Emma described her mother's criminal activities, her manipulation tactics, and her willingness to destroy Jordan professionally and personally. Diana's attorneys try to portray Emma as a confused child manipulated by an overly controlling father. Emma's response destroyed that narrative completely. I wasn't manipulated by my father. I was protecting him from my mother's criminal conspiracy. My father never asked me to gather evidence. I did it because I recognized that my mother was planning to commit federal crimes, and I wanted to prevent them. The appeals court rejected Diana's petition unanimously. Her conviction stood, her sentence remained unchanged, and her legal options were exhausted. Diana Boyer would spend the next 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release and no chance of overturning her conviction. As they left the courthouse after the appeals hearing, Emma walked beside Jordan with the confident stride of a young woman who had faced the worst life could offer and emerged stronger. Dad, I know this sounds strange, but I'm grateful this happened. Not for the pain it caused, but for what it taught me about people, about loyalty, about the difference between love and manipulation. Jordan felt immense pride in his daughter's wisdom and strength. Emma had been tested in ways no child should face, but she had emerged with her moral compass intact and her understanding of justice crystallized. Emma, you've learned lessons that will serve you well in life. You know how to recognize predators, how to gather evidence, how to protect the people you love. Most importantly, you know the difference between strength and cruelty, between justice and revenge. That evening, as Jordan sat in his home office reviewing the final legal documents that closed the appeals process, he reflected on the completeness of his victory. Diana and Charles were imprisoned. Their co-conspirators had been destroyed, and Emma was thriving despite the trauma she'd endured. But Jordan's satisfaction wasn't just about winning. It was about the thoroughness of the victory. His enemies hadn't just been defeated. They had been utterly annihilated. Their reputations were destroyed, their futures were eliminated, and their ability to threaten innocent people had been permanently removed. The military had taught Jordan that half measures in dealing with enemies only created future problems. By pursuing complete victory, by showing no mercy to those who had threatened his daughter, he had ensured that no one would ever mistake his love for weakness again. Diana Boyer had learned too late that Jordan's capacity for love was matched only by his capacity for absolute, merciless justice. The lesson had cost her everything, but it would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider threatening the Boyer family. Chapter 8. The Final Judgment. 2 years after Diana's conviction, Jordan Boyer had rebuilt his life into something stronger and more purposeful than before. Boyer Security had expanded internationally, with Emma working part-time in the company while completing her senior year of high school. She had accepted early admission to MIT, where she planned to study cybersecurity, a field that would allow her to protect people from digital predators the way her father protected them from physical threats. The healing process had been gradual but complete. Emma showed no lingering trauma from her mother's betrayal. Instead, she displayed a mature understanding of human nature that impressed everyone who met her. She had learned to distinguish between love and manipulation, between loyalty and blind trust, between justice and revenge. Jordan's own recovery had taken a different form. The betrayal had burned away any remaining naivety about human nature, leaving behind a man who was more cautious in his trust, but no less committed to protecting the innocent. His reputation in the security industry had grown to legendary status. Clients knew that Jordan Boyer would die before allowing harm to come to those under his protection. On a cold February morning, Jordan received a call that would test the completeness of his victory. Diana had been transferred to a minimum security facility after serving 2 years of her 18-year sentence, and she was requesting a meeting with Emma. Agent Delaney delivered the message with careful neutrality. Mr. Boyer, Diana claims she's found religion in prison and wants to apologize to Emma for the trauma she caused. The prison chaplain supports her request, and her rehabilitation counselors believe the meeting could be therapeutic for both mother and daughter. Jordan's response was immediate and final. Agent Delaney, my daughter owes that woman nothing. Not her time, not her attention, and certainly not her forgiveness. Diana Boyer gave up any right to contact Emma when she chose to involve her in criminal activities. But Emma, now 17 and preparing for college, had different ideas. Dad, I want to meet with her. Not to forgive her, and not because I miss her, but because I want her to see exactly what she lost when she chose to betray our family. Jordan studied his daughter's face, recognizing the cold determination that had helped her survive Diana's manipulation. Emma wasn't seeking reconciliation. She was seeking closure on her own terms. Emma, if you meet with her, it has to be with my attorney present and full recording equipment. I won't have her manipulating you again. Dad, she can't manipulate me anymore. I know exactly what she is now, and I want her to know that I know. The meeting was arranged for the following week at the Federal Correctional Facility. Jordan, Emma, and Frank Lamb sat across from Diana in a sterile conference room, with federal marshals monitoring the conversation and recording equipment documenting every word. Diana had aged significantly during her 2 years in prison. Her carefully maintained beauty had faded, replaced by the hard edges of a woman learning to survive in an unforgiving environment. But her eyes still held the calculating intelligence that had once fooled Jordan into thinking she loved him. Emma, sweetheart, I've thought about you every day since. Don't call me sweetheart. Emma's interruption was cold and precise. You lost the right to use endearments when you chose to involve me in your criminal conspiracy against my father. Diana's composure cracked slightly. Emma, I know you're angry, but if you could just understand. I understand perfectly. You seduced Charles Fry, provided him with confidential information about Dad's business, planned to frame Dad for domestic abuse, and used me as a weapon to keep him from discovering your crimes. I understand everything, including the fact that you're only sorry you got caught. Jordan watched with fierce pride as his daughter systematically destroyed Diana's attempts at manipulation. Emma had learned to see through emotional appeals and focus on facts and evidence. Diana tried a different approach. Emma, I made mistakes, but I'm your mother. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Emma's response was delivered with surgical precision. A mother protects her children from harm. You exposed me to criminal activities, psychological manipulation, and the trauma of keeping secrets that could have destroyed our family. You're not my mother. You're a criminal who happened to give birth to me. The words hit Diana like physical blows. Her carefully constructed image of herself as a victim of circumstances crumbled under Emma's clear-eyed assessment of her actions. I spent months recording your conversations, documenting your crimes, and protecting Dad from your manipulation. While you were planning to destroy him, I was gathering the evidence that would destroy you instead. Do you know what that taught me? It taught me that real love means protecting people, not using them. Diana's eyes filled with tears, but Emma remained unmoved. You're crying because you finally understand the consequences of your choices. Dad taught me that actions have consequences, that loyalty matters, and that family means protecting each other. You taught me what betrayal looks like and how to recognize it in the future. Frank Lamb observed the exchange with professional admiration. Emma was conducting herself like an experienced prosecutor, methodically demolishing Diana's attempts at emotional manipulation while maintaining complete control of the conversation. Diana made one final attempt. Emma, I'm still your mother. When I get out of prison, when you get out of prison, I'll be 29 years old with a career, possibly a family of my own, and 16 years of experience living without you in my life. You'll be a stranger who shares some of my DNA and nothing else." Emma stood to leave, her posture reflecting the confidence of a young woman who had faced the worst life could offer and emerged stronger. "I came here today to make sure you understand exactly what you lost when you chose to betray our family. You lost a daughter who loved you, a husband who protected you, and a life that most people would consider a blessing. You traded all of that for a criminal who's serving 25 years in federal prison." Diana's composure finally broke completely. "Emma, please." "Goodbye, Diana. I hope the next 16 years in prison give you time to think about whether your choices were worth what they cost you." As they left the prison, Jordan felt the final piece of closure clicking into place. Emma had faced her mother one last time and emerged victorious, demonstrating that Diana's attempts at manipulation had no power over her anymore. "How do you feel?" Jordan asked as they drove away from the federal facility. Emma was quiet for several minutes before responding. "I feel free, Dad. For 2 years, part of me wondered if I'd been too harsh, if maybe I should feel guilty about helping send her to prison. But seeing her today, watching her try to manipulate me even now, I know I made the right choice. She's exactly what I thought she was." Jordan reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. "Emma, you saved our family. Your courage, your intelligence, your commitment to truth, you're everything a father could hope for in a daughter." Emma smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Jordan had seen from her in months. "Dad, I learned from the best. You taught me that protecting family means sometimes doing hard things, that loyalty is earned through actions, not words, and that justice matters more than forgiveness." As they drove home, Jordan reflected on the completeness of his victory. Diana and her co-conspirators were imprisoned, their lives destroyed by the consequences of their choices. Emma had emerged from the trauma stronger and wiser, with a clear understanding of her own worth and an unshakable moral compass. But most importantly, the Boyer family had been purged of weakness, betrayal, and false loyalty. What remained was stronger, more honest, and completely united against any future threats. Diana Boyer had taught her daughter and husband valuable lessons about human nature, the importance of vigilance, and the cost of misplaced trust. The education had been expensive, but it had been worth every sacrifice to ensure that such betrayal could never happen again. Chapter 9. Legacy of Strength. 5 years had passed since Diana's conviction, and the Boyer family name had been restored to its position of respect and influence. Jordan Boyer, now 47, commanded one of the most successful security firms on the East Coast, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 executives to foreign diplomats who trusted him with their lives. His reputation was built on an absolute commitment to protecting those under his care, backed by the knowledge that he had faced the ultimate test of loyalty within his own family and emerged victorious. Emma Boyer, now 22 and a graduate of MIT with degrees in cybersecurity and criminal justice, had joined Boyer Security as head of digital investigations. Her expertise in tracking financial crimes and corporate espionage had made her one of the youngest and most sought-after specialists in the field. Her childhood trauma had been transformed into professional strength, allowing her to protect other families from the kind of betrayal she had experienced. The Boyer home had been rebuilt as well, not physically but emotionally. The rooms that had once echoed with Diana's lies and manipulation now reflected the honest, direct communication between a father and daughter who had survived the ultimate test of family loyalty. They worked together, planned together, and faced challenges together with the unshakable trust that only comes from surviving betrayal and choosing each other over the ones who had tried to destroy them. On a spring morning in May, Jordan received a call that would provide the final chapter in Diana's story. She had been killed in a prison fight, struck down by another inmate during a dispute over commissary privileges. The irony was not lost on Jordan. A woman who had spent her life manipulating others had finally encountered someone who couldn't be charmed, threatened, or reasoned with. Agent Delaney delivered the news with professional courtesy. "Mr. Boyer, I wanted to inform you personally before you heard it through other channels. Diana Boyer died yesterday at the Federal Correctional Facility. The investigation is ongoing, but preliminary reports indicate she was involved in an altercation with another inmate. Jordan felt no sadness, no regret, no sense of loss. Diana Boyer had died to him 5 years ago when she chose to threaten Emma. The woman who had been killed in prison was simply a criminal who had finally faced the consequences of a lifetime of manipulation and betrayal. Emma's reaction was equally clinical. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Do you feel anything about Mom's death?" Jordan studied his daughter's face, recognizing that she was processing her own complex emotions about her mother's demise. "Emma, I feel relief. Diana Boyer was a threat to innocent people for her entire adult life. Her death means she can never hurt another family the way she tried to hurt ours." Emma nodded slowly. "I feel the same way. Not happy exactly, but relieved. Like a threat that's been hanging over us for 5 years has finally been removed." The funeral arrangements fell to Diana's sister, Maureen Hewitt, who had maintained a relationship with Diana throughout her imprisonment. Maureen contacted Jordan to inform him of the memorial service, making it clear that both he and Emma were unwelcome. "Jordan, I know you blame Diana for everything that happened, but she was still Emma's mother. Your daughter should have the chance to say goodbye." Jordan's response was cold and final. "Maureen, Diana stopped being Emma's mother when she chose to involve her in criminal activities. Emma said goodbye to Diana 5 years ago. She has no interest in attending a memorial service for a woman who tried to destroy her father." Emma confirmed Jordan's assessment when Maureen called her directly. "Aunt Maureen, the woman you're mourning isn't the same person who raised me. That woman died when she chose Charles Fry over her family. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make other people feel better." The memorial service was sparsely attended. A few family members who had remained loyal to Diana despite her crimes, and some prison acquaintances who barely knew her. The obituary in the local newspaper was brief and factual, listing her survivors and the basic facts of her life, while omitting any mention of her criminal activities or the destruction she had caused. Charles Fry remained in federal prison, serving his 25-year sentence with no possibility of parole. The last Jordan had heard, Charles was working in the prison library, his charm and sophistication reduced to helping illiterate inmates write letters to their families. His appeals had been exhausted, his assets seized, and his future reduced to the concrete and steel that would contain him until he was an old man. Matthew Clark had died of a heart attack during his 2nd year in prison, his body unable to handle the stress of incarceration after a lifetime of luxury and corruption. His law firm had been dissolved, his assets distributed to his victims, and his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of using the legal system to victimize innocent people. Dean Nash had been released after serving 8 years of his 12-year sentence, but his reputation was destroyed and his ability to find work severely limited. Jordan occasionally received reports that Nash was working as a security guard at a shopping mall, a fitting in for a man who had once threatened a federal agent's daughter. The network of corruption that had enabled Diana and Charles's crimes had been completely dismantled. Judge Milton Shepard died in prison, having lost his pension, his reputation, and his freedom. Court clerk Sonia Godfrey served 4 years and was released to a life of poverty and obscurity. Her career in the legal system permanently ended. As Jordan reflected on the complete destruction of his enemies, he felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished with perfect efficiency. Every person who had threatened his family, who had enabled Diana's betrayal, who had participated in the conspiracy against him, had faced consequences that perfectly matched their crimes. Emma had grown into a woman of remarkable strength and clarity. Her childhood trauma transformed into professional expertise and unshakable moral courage. She was dating a fellow MIT graduate, a young man named Ryan who worked in cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. Jordan had thoroughly investigated Ryan's background and found him to be exactly what he appeared: honest, intelligent, and completely devoted to Emma. "Dad," Emma said one evening as they reviewed case files in Jordan's home office, "do you ever think about what would have happened if Mom had just been honest about her feelings? If she had asked for a divorce instead of trying to destroy you?" Jordan considered the question carefully. "Emma, Your mother wasn't capable of honesty. She was a predator who saw our family as an opportunity to be exploited. Even if she had asked for a divorce, she would have tried to manipulate the situation to her advantage. The betrayal was inevitable because it was part of her nature. Emma nodded, her understanding of human psychology refined by years of studying criminal behavior. I've learned to recognize the signs now. The way predators test boundaries, the way they try to isolate their targets from support systems, the way they gradually escalate their manipulation. Mom followed the textbook pattern perfectly. Jordan felt immense pride in his daughter's wisdom and strength. She had been tested in ways that would have broken many people, but she had emerged stronger, more perceptive, and completely committed to protecting others from the kind of predators who had once threatened their family. Boyer Security had become more than just a business. It was a legacy of strength, integrity, and absolute commitment to protecting the innocent. Emma would inherit the company eventually, but she had already earned her place as Jordan's partner and equal through her intelligence, courage, and unwavering loyalty. As Jordan looked around his home office, filled with awards, photographs of successful operations, and evidence of a life spent protecting others, he felt the deep satisfaction of a man who had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious. His enemies were dead, imprisoned, or destroyed. His daughter was strong, successful, and completely loyal. His business was thriving, and his reputation was unshakable. Diana Boyer had taught him valuable lessons about trust, loyalty, and the importance of vigilance in protecting family. The education had been expensive, but it had been worth every sacrifice to ensure that such betrayal could never happen again. Jordan Boyer had learned that love and loyalty were not weaknesses to be exploited. They were strengths that, when properly protected and fiercely defended, could overcome any enemy and survive any betrayal. The war was